Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared Dramantis. I am Hunter M. Stop believing in cryptids. As you may know, cryptids have been a hot topic for many centuries at this point, with a recent resurgence in interest especially as of lately. In fact, it may surprise you to know that every single popular post on this subreddit, even the ones you only pretend to believe, is real. Every mythical monster, spectral spirit, and abhorrent aberration you've ever heard of is real. It is the job of my order to hunt down and put these creatures down, but it's becoming worse by the day. And it's all of humanity's fault. I'm not referring to climate change or man-made disasters or anything like that to cause these creatures to become more aggressive or anything like that, but it is, inherently, man's fault. I've been given special permissions to reveal to you all the foundation of my order and a few of the hunts I've been sent on in order to convince the world to stop believing in cryptids. Otherwise we won't last much longer against the tide of the night. I beg of you one and all, read this through to the end, and heed my warning, or all may perish. The order I am a part of was founded in the far-flung past. You all may be familiar with the concept of belief manifesting itself in human life, as it's a common belief for some cultures, but is known to most. Believe that money and fortune will come to your life, and it will, etc. What I'm sure most of you don't know is that this idea has been around for far longer than anyone might think. The founding of my order occurred in the time of ancient Greece and the birth of the Roman Empire, as a group of philosophers had theorized and discovered the power of belief. These philosophers theorized that human belief could manifest many things, from material to immaterial, be it non-living or fully sentient. It mattered not the nature or intelligence of what we manifested, and I suppose in our own way humanity is almost godlike. There was, however, a caveat to our mind manifesting power. The true limit was based on what people believed, and how many believed it. The basic concept would be that for a thing to manifest in the entity that is made real, multiple people would have to believe it having the same characteristics and/or powers. For instance, the gods themselves. Yes, to answer bluntly, the gods of every single religion to ever exist were, or are, real. Only due to human belief, though. I've met multiple versions of each major religion's god or patriarch god, each with varying degrees of power, but for all they could or couldn't do, they were still never exactly how pictured, or nearly as powerful as the holy texts may describe. In essence, if the world came under one grand religion and there were no differing sects or denominations, and everyone believed this god looked one way, and had these powers, etc., we could manifest an actual all-powerful, all-knowing deity. So now you know the scale of what this power, or curse some might say, humanity can do. Now think of what cultures all around the world have in common. Myths, legends, urban rumors, ghost sightings, and more. Now think of the amount of people who fear and believe these things. Less than the people whose culture it is a part of, for sure, but not an insignificant number. I'm guessing you know where I'm going from here. Cryptids are real, and it's our fault. Don't get me wrong, not all cryptids are malevolent, some are cooperative and benevolent, and some act as prophets for those who know where and what they are. Nessie, for instance, is cooperative, benevolent, and prophetic. We've monitored her for a while now, ever since we've found her really. We have done our best to ensure her concealment from the public eye, and she lets us monitor her in the lock, as well as saving people from drowning in it when she can. She hibernates for 1 whole month before the first major chill. She's almost like a reverse groundhog. As soon as she lay her head down and doesn't get up for a day or two, that's our first sign of winter in Scotland. The Mothman is another prophet, and some mistake him for malevolent. That has proven a difficult trial to overcome for our agreement with the Mothman. We have also agreed to conceal his presence from public eye, and in exchange we get a strange kind of feeling and glimpses of images whenever a disaster is about to occur. It's always jarring, even after the first time and knowing what to expect, to get a message from Mothman. I could go on, but you get the idea. Maybe later, if you all want, I could recount some of the stories from my hunts, but there are two in particular I wish to share with you all. It will help to prove my point as to why you should stop believing in cryptids. The Wendigo are creatures of Native American culture, malevolent shades, taking over a human body, causing them to go feral and insane, devouring human flesh but never ceasing in their hunger. In myth, they are typically quite pale and emaciated, looking more ghostly than human, but still retaining their humanoid form. I've hunted one such creature before, and it wasn't easy then. And it hasn't gotten any easier. The preparation for this hunt was extensive. We acquired the aid of a medicine man, an older gentleman whose name I couldn't pronounce at the time, so he told me to just call him John, as it would be easier for me. At the time, all we needed were some powerful tranquilizers and the ability to fight the creature until it was subdued. John had described to us the power of the Wendigo, how it could hold even a grown man down and rend the flesh from him with little effort, and while the tranquilizers would weaken it, we'd need at least 3 other strong, well-trained men. I gathered a few other hunters, known as P, the marksman, A, the swordsman, and Theta, the support, and together with myself, equipped with a spear, and John, bringing his trusty shotgun, we ventured into the territory suspected to belong to the Wendigo. The medicine man was exceptional at tracking down the Wendigo by some sort of scent I later learned how to pick up myself, the unmistakable scent of a vile curse. I won't even attempt to tell you the smell a curse gives off, as I can hardly describe it myself, but for those who know how to trace and track a curse, you know the scent. We trudged through the forest as quietly as we could, though John was as a specter, seeming to hover above the ground in his quietness. He made no audible noise, and he seemed to glide through the wood with relative ease. The rest of us were accustomed to the hunt and stalking our prey, but couldn't quite move like John, and Theta was the greenest among us, also the loudest. I think that's why he was the one. Halfway into the Wendigo's territory, I took note of Theta's disappearance, as though he had vanished into thin air. I approached John and gave him a small hand signal. We all stopped dead in our tracks. The only trace we had that Theta was ever even there was his revolver lying in the dirt, his medical supplies, and most importantly the sedatives, were gone with him. I muttered curses and spat vile words under my breath at the creature we hunted, but took solace in the fact that it would soon be dead. We moved more carefully in the darkness of the undergrowth, John having a flare at the ready at all times since the disappearance of Theta. Wendigos have an aversion, a weakness, to fire, he told me, but they can be harmed by most means. Fear not, and keep your wits about you. John continued to glide across the forest floor towards the scent of the curse, but even those of us not well versed could smell decay and death on the wind. We were almost certainly approaching the creature's lair. The ground around the cave mouth that served as the creature's lair was saturated with blood, old and new, and took on a frigid, damp quality. Even the air seemed to almost freeze around the creature's lair. Without a word, we all understood that this was the creature's home, where it had brought Theta, and that it would also become its tomb. We all made sure our preparations were absolute before entering the cave mouth. John made sure he had a shell racked, P made sure he had a round in the chamber of his rifle, A and checked our weapons, to see they were sharp and ready. We could hear a ghastly mix howling and almost hissing noises coming from deep within the cave as we made our approach, and John handed us each a flare. With the loss of our sedatives, our new plan was to blind and frighten the creature into confusion, and subdue it with bullet and blade in its panicked and less cunning state. As we made our way deeper into the cave, and the noises made by the creature became louder and more blood-chilling, as the stench of rot and death almost became overwhelming, John turned back and nodded to us all. We popped the flares. We rushed our way into the antechamber of the cave, the Wendigo's lair, and it stared up at us in surprise, startled away from its never-satisfying meal, the latest victim of the Wendigo, Theta. He was mangled, bones broken, marrow eaten, and a visage of pure terror and endless sadness stuck on his face in death. His chest had been torn open as the creature had been devouring everything inside and outside of him. Seeing the state of our comrade pushed us onward into the fight with vigor and veracity. The Wendigo shrank away from the approach of the fire of the flares, and we fanned out into a semicircle. We all dropped our flares around the Wendigo, encasing it in a cage of fire. P and John nodded to A and myself, and we stepped into the ring of fire, as the former stood without. I approached the Wendigo with the caution and dexterity of a cougar, spear pointed out in front of me and body close and small, while A approached with the strength and confidence of a lion, sword pointed at the Wendigo in a stance that could be offensive or defensive. The Wendigo scuttled slowly back into the corner of our fiery cage, backing up to the cold stone wall as it hissed and snapped at us, but we fanned out and approached from the sides. As soon as the Wendigo had no further ground to give, it was like someone had dropped a match into the gasoline, all hell let loose. P and John fired hatred in the form of lead into the Wendigo, P hitting the Wendigo square in the shoulder as John hit its center mass with 2 slugs. A let fly a swing meant to hack off the monster's arm the rest of the way from its shoulder that P had hit, but it ducked, taking a glancing swipe to the back as it scurried on all fours to A and took out his legs. I had begun charging the creature before A had made his swing, and I reached him in time, stabbing into the creature's ribs as 2 more shots rang out and hit the Wendigo in places I couldn't quite tell, and it howled an awful howl, like a woman in pain mixed with an elk's cry. I had begun recovering his wits and breath as he took his sword and managed to drive it into the Wendigo's shoulder, leaving one of its arms lying limply to the side, and he wrenched it upward, sending the arm sprawling away from its body. The Wendigo tried to claw at A with its good arm and snap at him, ever-hungry jaws yearning for fresh and supple flesh. I yanked my spear out, tearing chunks of rib and rotten flesh with it as I stabbed its arm down to the ground, effectively pinning the creature. I took his sword and stabbed it through the creature's eye, and shoving hard. The arm broke under the force and bent in an unnatural way, as the Wendigo turned to lie flat on its back with its arms still trying to face the way it had been when it was on its stomach. I kept his hands firmly on the sword as the Wendigo struggled weakly against our restraint, and he planted his legs firmly between the creature's. Though not much had been done on our accounts in reality, the creature's frigid aura and the force required to puncture its body and sever its limbs left A and myself more tired than we should have been after only a minute of fighting, and through a few panting breaths A managed to snarl, "We have it pinned, remove the heart and let us be rid of this monstrosity." John came over with some sort of intricately designed knife and pierced the chest of the Wendigo, slicing the blade down its torso and dragging the knife down to its stomach, as he reached in to remove the heart, just about the only thing to still survive the rotting curse of the Wendigo's body other than its bones. "Keep it there," he said, rushing out of the cave. "It may not seem so, but it still lives. Only after I burn its heart will it truly die." And so A and I waited. It was only a few minutes, and we never relented in our restraint of the Wendigo. Thankfully we didn't, As its jet-black eyes became wide when it realized its heart was being burned, it screamed and fought and kicked at A with all the force its broken, battered body could muster. A abetted the kicking of the monster as best he could, and P fired a few rounds into the things to reduce its struggling with his deadly accuracy. After a full 30-second struggle against the thing, it let out one more haunting shriek and fell limp, its jet-black eyes fading into a pure, milky white. This, I assure you, is the more interesting of the two tales I have to share with you this night. More recently, the image, power, and strength of a Wendigo has begun to change with popular stories and such. The modern depiction of Wendigo as antlered humanoids with deer skulls, black fur, nigh-impervious bodies, black blood, and filling the air with the scent of copper is both inaccurate to most legends, and a pain in the Order's collective ass. There's only one thing we've found that actually works on the damn things that you all fabricated: toxins. Extremely potent toxins, ones that are not only difficult to get a hold of, but difficult to manufacture. P and I were sent on this mission after our success with the original Wendigo. I didn't come along because this time the plan was much simpler, as I had a shield and a small crossbow. Fill the thing with sedatives and neurotoxin until it fatigued itself enough to have its heart burned. The neurotoxin was there to prevent its struggle when we burned its heart. By this point I had learned how to detect a curse upon the wind, and we had tracked the thing deep into a wooded valley in the Appalachians. This thing was faster than the original Wendigo we fought, and truth be told, when we first glimpsed the thing we thought we were dealing with some sort of fucked up Sasquatch, but of course not. The belief around the Wendigo had changed, and so did the creatures we now hunt. P and I had managed to catch the thing running through the tree line ahead of us, and I dashed in front of P to form a vanguard and distract the creature while P filled it with toxins and sedatives. The thing barreled into my shield at almost lightning speeds, and I had no clue what had hit me, but it thrashed around the edges of my shield, trying to get at my delicate vitals and head. I had been prepared for a good amount of force, like the original Wendigo, but this thing almost knocked me onto my back. I howled in pain as it clawed around my shield, weakening my weapon and shield arms, knocking my hand crossbow out of its holster away from me, and almost breaking my shield arm in two with the impact. P stayed calm, and starting firing dart after dart into the creature at suspected vital locations. Most of them plinked off the creature like it was wearing some sort of armor. What the actual fuck is wrong with this thing? I cried out to P, unsure of how long I could withstand the assault. I don't know, came his reply. But I have an idea. Hold on for just a little longer, M, and I heard the dull pop of a cork bottle. I pried my weapon arm loose of the creature's grip and reared back for a thrust of my spear, but the spear just barely drew any blood on impact. This seemed to drive the creature into a frenzy, and it began gaining ground on P and shoving me back. I heard an extremely loud gunshot go off as P fired his high-caliber rifle into the thing. The bullet managed to pierce flesh, deeply enough for the creature to feel it and howl in pain. P pulled the bolt as the howling kicked up into a fever pitch and prepared another round, firing into the creature's shoulder this time. I expected it to have weakened the creature like the previous Wendigo, but it seemed to just piss it off even more. P had told me later that he had coated those bullets in the sedative and neurotoxin, and had simply hoped it would be enough. If it hadn't been, we would have both died. I felt the assault begin to lessen against my shield and body, and I tried to drive the creature back, but it was like trying to move a mountain with nothing but a shovel. I did manage to cease its charge forward though, and I jabbed it a few more times with the spear, puncturing deeper into the gash I had already made. P. Bring me the damn vials. I cried out as I screamed a war cry and continued to jab the creature, running almost purely on adrenaline. P, being the superhuman marksman he is, took stock of the situation and instead, quickly ran to my hand crossbow, attached the uncorked vials via some string to the bolt loaded into the crossbow and fired at the creature. The bolt itself seemed to have no effect on the creature, but I reached up and around the wrathful, unabating claws of the creature and smashed my spearhead against the vials, coating the tip in glistening, painful death. I reared back and shoved the creature one last time before thrusting my spear into the wound I had made deep, thrusting almost center mass deep into the creature and wrenching my spear inside of it. It howled and reared back, swinging full force into my shield as it sent me flying into a tree, stunning me for a few moments. The creature was slowed by the earlier efforts of P, already having sedative and neurotoxin inside it. It tried to clamber towards me, but it seemed that I had hastened the effects by forcing so much toxin so deeply inside of the creature. It charged at me sluggishly, slowing down even before the charge had fully started, and only getting slower as it progressed. It collapsed and tumbled forward a few yards in front of me, and would later find out it died there. No ritual, no burning of the heart, nothing needed to kill it. It oozed black, goopy blood as it lay there dying. Consciousness failed me shortly after it had collapsed. The next thing I remember is waking up in the infirmary at the Order's headquarters in North America, 1 week later. I had, in fact, suffered broken bones and ribs, shock, as well as a concussion that put me into a small coma. My spine still doesn't feel quite right after my encounter with that damnable creature. Shortly after this incident, many other hunters came up missing, confirmed dead, or severely injured by many powerful creatures, more powerful than either their previous counterparts or any cryptid to come before it. I was tasked by the Order to help convince the world to stop believing so strongly in cryptids, or at least to believe in the original myths, and was given special permissions to reveal ourselves in order to do so. And so here I am, recounting to you, one of the strongest gatherings of people who believe in these creatures, my tales, and my orders. I beseech you all, stop believing in cryptids. I'm not sure how much longer we can hold them back. The bullet managed to pierce flesh, deeply enough for the creature to feel it and howl in pain. P pulled the bolt as the howling kicked up into a fever pitch and prepared another round, firing into the creature's shoulder this time. I expected it to have weakened the creature like the previous Wendigo, but it seemed to just piss it off even more. P had told me later that he had coated those bullets in the sedative and neurotoxin, and had simply hoped it would be enough. If it hadn't been, we would have both died. I felt the assault begin to lessen against my shield and body, and I tried to drive the creature back, but it was like trying to move a mountain with nothing but a shovel. I did manage to cease its charge forward though, and I jabbed it a few more times with the spear, puncturing deeper into the gash I had already made. P. Bring me the damn vials. I cried out as I screamed a war cry and continued to jab the creature, running almost purely on adrenaline. P, being the superhuman marksman he is, took stock of the situation and instead, quickly ran to my hand crossbow, attached the uncorked vials via some string to the bolt loaded into the crossbow and fired at the creature. The bolt itself seemed to have no effect on the creature, but I reached up and around the wrathful, unabating claws of the creature and smashed my spearhead against the vials, coating the tip in glistening, painful death. I reared back and shoved the creature one last time before thrusting my spear into the wound I had made deep, thrusting almost center mass deep into the creature and wrenching my spear inside of it. It howled and reared back, swinging full force into my shield as it sent me flying into a tree, stunning me for a few moments. The creature was slowed by the earlier efforts of P, already having sedative and neurotoxin inside it. It tried to clamber towards me, but it seemed that I had hastened the effects by forcing so much toxin so deeply inside of the creature. It charged at me sluggishly, slowing down even before the charge had fully started, and only getting slower as it progressed. It collapsed and tumbled forward a few yards in front of me, and would later find out it died there. No ritual, no burning of the heart, nothing needed to kill it. It oozed black, goopy blood as it lay there dying. Consciousness failed me shortly after it had collapsed. The next thing I remember is waking up in the infirmary at the Order's headquarters in North America, 1 week later. I had, in fact, suffered broken bones and ribs, shock, as well as a concussion that put me into a small coma. My spine still doesn't feel quite right after my encounter with that damnable creature. Shortly after this incident, many other hunters came up missing, confirmed dead, or severely injured by many powerful creatures, more powerful than either their previous counterparts or any cryptid to come before it. I was tasked by the Order to help convince the world to stop believing so strongly in cryptids, or at least to believe in the original myths, and was given special permissions to reveal ourselves in order to do so. And so here I am, recounting to you, one of the strongest gatherings of people who believe in these creatures, my tales, and my orders. I beseech you all, stop believing in cryptids. I'm not sure how much longer we can hold them back. Second story. This story was shared Sicarius. I went in search of a cryptid that my great-great-grandfather encountered. Whatever your thoughts on California as a state, there is no denying that it is the home to some of the most awe-inspiring landmarks not just in the US but in the world. Sequoia National Park, in particular, which is 631 square miles of beauty, is home to one of the world's oldest and largest living organisms in the world, the behemoth General Sherman redwood tree. It's mind-boggling to think that this ancient being was alive for thousands of years. It was alive during the American Revolution, during the Spanish Inquisition, it was alive during the reign of King Tut, as many of its sister redwoods were that constitute the forest lands. This lost world has seen its share of rivers moving and species evolving, and unfortunately, going extinct as well. The last known California grizzly bear sighting was in 1924 after they were thought to have been hunted to extinction by prospectors who poured into the California mountains during the gold rush. Who knows, there could still be one out there somewhere. These types of sightings happen quite frequently. The Yangtze River dolphin, thought to be extinct, had also recently reappeared. Beyond the California grizzly bear and the Cyclopean redwoods, I believe there is something else in those mountains. The radical California wildfires that have been plaguing the state for nearly 2 decades have had a monumental, possibly irreversible, toll on the various parks' ecosystems. While most fires are natural and sometimes necessary, they have been getting more pervasive and out of control. Climate change is a big factor in their cause as rising temperatures begin to dry out kindling. However, there is another cause which is much less talked about. Over the years, people have been pushing more and more into the California wilds, not only creating infrastructure which gives fuel to fires, but carelessly causing them as well. Just some of the causes of the California wildfires range from vehicular sparks, faulty power lines, and a gender reveal. As a result, animal populations have begun to flee their homes and pushed back into towns and cities, occasionally resulting in attacks. The craziest stories of animal attacks weren't coming from those that wandered into town though. Soon after, there was circulations of attacks from strange unidentified creatures that were monstrous in nature. They were described as being nearly the size of a horse and bird-like. They sounded so outlandish. These people had to have been attacked by mountain lions or bears or something. The natives of the area, however, actually had stories of these creatures dating back hundreds of years, so possibly not too far-fetched. Either way, something that was once living deep in the woods was now beginning to emerge, it seems. Then I came across something that cemented my intrigue. Not too long ago, my grandfather had passed away. I'd like to believe he went peacefully, but the poor old man had a few health issues caused by the Central Valley's poor air quality. While rummaging through his old belongings, I came across, what my father told me, was the old journal of my great-great-grandfather, which my grandfather had kept in an old cedar chest. Apparently my great-great-grandfather was quite the renowned tracker and surveyor during his time. I spent a whole afternoon reading that thing, immersing myself into a time which sprang into existence right after the era of the American Old West. One of the journal entries details an expedition up into the Sequoia National Forests. July 26 of 1908. The previous few nights have been filled with such peril as I have never felt in all of my previous adventures. We have come up into the Sierra Nevadas, my colleague and I, Mr. Jim Foxhart, for a very peculiar job sanctioned to us by the state of California. The state is beginning more aggressive expansion into these foothills, which were once occupied by Monachi. They claim this expansion has caused some commotion from some peculiar wildlife, sounding mostly as monsters in their various descriptions. We rendezvoused with a Dr. Edward McMillan, a biologist from the University of Davis, who has accompanied us to catalog and identify this potentially unknown species, though I was dubious that we would come across anything of the sort. On about the third night, setting camp much deeper into the redwood forest, I was only an hour or so into my night watch when I began to hear loud screeches, the likes of which were unidentifiable to me. These screeches would come and go at no predictable pattern, but they seemed to be calling to each other and getting louder. Mr. Foxhart was also awakened by this sound, and we sat there together for a good 15 to 20 minutes attempting to identify what creature it could belong to. Having no such luck, we woke Dr. McMillan, who also stated that these sounds were not of an animal in which he was familiar with. We were certain, however, that it was multiple animals, a pack of some sort, and that they were predatory. We grabbed our rifles and lanterns and headed towards the source of the nearest cries, but the cries had stopped. I heard some rustling just to our right, and upon raising my lantern, I was flabbergasted to see a large emu of some sort, but with a large horse head, sharp claws on both hands and feet, and a long feathery tail. Its eyes glistened in my light, and though I only caught a quick glimpse of it, I could see that it was a beast almost the size of a horse. The animal quickly darted off with great speed. The other two men were just as puzzled as I am, though Dr. McMillan had said what we had just seen looked very much like a species in the Dromaeosauridae family, a species of dinosaur. We tracked them down for about a mile, but the further we pushed away from camp, the more we began to hear loud screeches, to which Foxhart agreed, sounded very much like warning cries. Evidently, we were pushing into their territory deep into the forest. We lost track of the creatures and the calls subsided. We spent another couple of weeks in the forest, but after that night, made no further contact or found any relevant traces, and so decided that this pack must have moved deeper into the forest to avoid human conflict. I had never really been a big believer in cryptids like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. Sure, it was amusing watching those documentaries on the Discovery Channel or those videos on YouTube, but I always felt that there were other explanations for what people encountered. This connection, however, was just too tantalizing. There was no way it could be exactly as everyone described it. Where could it have been hiding all these years? Besides, it had been a while since I had just gotten away back to nature, not that I needed such an excuse. After an exhausting few months of work and school balance, my brain was on autopilot. Once the parks opened back up, I had decided to plan a solo outing for myself. I packed up some gear, my Kodak camera, rations, my lucky knife and headed out west to the sequoias. I drove up the winding roads, past some devastation left by the fires of the summer. Businesses and homes were burnt down. Some were just being cleared, some were being rebuilt. I was good to see that society would carry on, though I had no doubt in my mind that there were lives ruined. Would we ever learn our lesson? It was good to get out of the car after a few-hour drive and stretch once I found a good campsite. I was lucky to find a place secluded, probably because this was an area which was associated with the alleged attacks. I actually did go on evening hikes with my Kodak and a field recorder. I'm not sure what I expected really. I guess I let my imagination get the best of me. I only wanted to spend a good week. I don't like wasting my vacation leave willy-nilly. Then, it became real. It was Thursday night when I was awakened from my sleep by a loud screeching sound. It invaded my dreams first, and then pulled me out, looking up at the moonlit tent walls. I laid there quietly for I don't know how long, trying to decipher that sound. The journal entry then came to mind. Was this what my great-great-grandfather heard? I was both excited and terrified. I had to investigate. I grabbed my Kodak, flashlight and of course, my knife, and slowly crawled out of my tent. I found that I was not as good as my great-great-grandfather had been at determining directions, as the sound sounded like it was coming from all around the forest, echoing through the old pines and off the cliffs. It soon became apparent to me that, as my grandfather had also determined, there were multiple calls responding to each other. I don't know what oddly placed bravery came over me, but I had the sudden courage to search into the dark forest for them. I quietly scanned the area for them, at first only circling my campsite. Luckily, I had a good sense of direction, so I knew I wouldn't get lost. I then got a good bearing on where the sound was emanating from, so I started strolling in that direction. I walked for a good 10 minutes when the screeches suddenly began to bark louder and more frequently. I heard a rustle just off in the distance to my left. I quickly aimed my powerful light, and saw a black bear running off. It wasn't really the bears I was worried about though, as I always had a small can of bear spray on me, but what was he running from? For whatever asinine reason, maybe I was still a bit tired, I pressed on. Now, I'm not a tracker by any means. I wasn't even in Boy Scouts, but I could have sworn I saw odd bird-like tracks in the dirt, or at least I thought I did. The hair stood on my neck as more and more, the events of the journal entry and the stories suddenly became more plausible. I couldn't be, could it? This whole time, I guess I just thought I was going to find some loudly mating birds and then have a good chuckle and go back to bed. There was more commotion going on around me. I would frantically whip my light in the direction but would see nothing. Maybe about an hour or so into my night stroll, I came across some odd structure. It looked like some kind of weaving of sticks and trash. I cautiously approached for a closer. Oh my God! It was a nest. There were eggs in there, odd-looking eggs. They looked the size or regular chicken eggs actually. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment. Then it hit me. Something literally hit me. I went stumbling back as something slammed into my side with immense force. I quickly scrambled to my feet and frantically looked around. There were clicking noises now coming from all around me. Then I saw it. It jumped out of the foliage with tremendous height and began to cackle at me, bowing low. It was trying to intimidate me. Some sort of bird-like animal with a long tail diagonally pointing up and a long snout and claws at the end of its feathered arms. I instantly drew the connection between these creatures and the creatures of the stories. I had just stumbled upon something that may have existed for millions of years, evolving in its own way, in near total isolation and uncategorized by humans. Funny enough, however, I did note one notable difference. These creatures were not actually horse size, more like the size of a large dog. Some things are just exaggerated, I guess. In either case, the one staring me down sent shivers coursing through my body. I was suddenly knocked down again. I pushed myself up with all my might. There was another one. The one in front of me was just a distraction. Now, there were three, all flanking me. I knew there had to be more. I also knew they were just defending their nest. I wasn't any less terrified. One to my right charged me. I got him with my bear spray just as he lunged. I got him square in the face as he began to flail. The others looked puzzled and squawked at each other. I quickly sprayed a line of spray, and backed away slowly. I continued fast walking backwards with my light on the nest until it was out of sight. I would continuously hear squawking from around me. These forest ninjas were monitoring my every move. I had my bear spray ready as I figured that would be a more effective defense than my knife. It wasn't nearly as sharp as what they were packing. Every once in a while, I would catch a glimpse of them, their eyes shining in my light, off in the distance, flanking me. If these animals really wanted to, they could have swarmed me. I think they were just being sure that I didn't pose a further threat to their nest. They weren't taking any chances, and neither should I. I began hiking towards my jeep, bypassing my campsite as it would have been foolish of me to try to sleep there tonight. After some time, as I approached the roadside clearing where I parked my jeep, the squawking and rustling had faded. I hauled myself into my jeep, exhausted from the running and the terror. I locked the doors, reclined my seat and laid there contemplating what I just experienced, wondering if it was real or just a dream brought on by too many nights watching creepy videos. I didn't notice myself drift off to sleep. The next morning I got up late, around 11-ish, as you can imagine after having the rough night I had. I made the short hike to my campsite and found it undisturbed. I packed up my tent and the rest of my belongings and gear, but took one last look around the site. I didn't see anything that would provide indication of what happened last night. I normally don't drink coffee, but I grabbed some at the nearest 7-Eleven as I figured I'd have a long drive home. I unpacked my stuff as usual as if nothing different had happened this time. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe it was a dream. Hell, I didn't even think to use my camera or my field recorder. Damn. As I was unpacking my backpack, however, I noticed something was caught to the backstrap. It was a feather. A large feather. Third story. This story was shared girl_from_the_crypt. To all the wannabe cryptid hunters, stay the fuck out of my woods. Did you know that self-proclaimed cryptid hunters are a thing these days? Turns out there's these online communities full of sick badasses, who order combat gear on Amazon and drive out to supposedly haunted locations to explore and film themselves. Why am I ranting about this? Apparently, some shithead has shared the location of the plot of land that's been in my family for generations. Now, you'd think owning an entire patch of woodland would mean we're rich, but it's actually really costly to take care of. No forestry work can be done there and our staff is constantly patrolling the area, looking for irregularities. It's a dangerous job and we've lost more than a few hires in regrettable ways. Most of the time, when everyone's careful and meets the required precautions, everything goes over smoothly and the things in the forest are kept in check. I wish we could just fence the perimeter and be done with it, but due to reasons too complicated to explain right now, that's not an option. Plus, it's pretty lonely out here. You'd have to drive off-roads for half an hour to get here, so we normally don't have to deal with any unexpected visitors. There's a spot in my woods I frequent, a little clearing surrounded by tall trees and wild rose bushes. I always light a campfire there to sit at and relax. Right now, the ground is frozen over and we've had a lot of snowfall, but I don't mind the chill. I do so love those pretty icicles hanging from the branches. The clearing is my refuge from everything. I'm not good with people and day-to-day interactions exhaust me, so being by myself is something akin to an essential need of mine. Yesterday afternoon, I was hanging out in my usual spot, when suddenly, a voice called out to me from behind. "You! Turn around!" When I got to my feet, I found myself facing a young man of the very species I described earlier. Armed, cargo pants, combat boots and camo backpack. There was a small camera mounted to his helmet. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. He backed off, visibly puzzled. "I thought you were some kind of ghost. I'm the legal owner of these woods, and if you don't get off my property this instant, I will call the police," I told him. "Why? Why are you wearing a wedding dress?" he stuttered. "This is my private property, I could dance around stark naked if I wanted to." "How on earth did you find this place?" "The woods? I read about them online. Someone posted about there being creatures here. Cryptids. So you thought you'd go check it out?" I squinted at him. Something wasn't quite right with that guy, aside from him being crazy enough to show up here in the first place. I could sense something looking at him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Just a hunch, but my gut instinct never misleads me. Yeah. I'm a cryptid hunter. Or well, I don't hunt them per se. I guess I would, I just haven't been all that successful yet, he admitted with an awkward chuckle. Here, I said flatly. I couldn't shake the weird feeling he was giving me. "You're still trespassing. Say, did anyone stop you on your way in?" "No." "Why? Is there someone else here?" How the hell had he gotten past the security staff? There had to be a blind spot somewhere which he had accidentally come across. I decided not to let on how many safety measures we had in place. Better not to further pique his interest. "Nope," I lied, patting down my skirt. "Come on. Follow me, I'll see you out. Can't I just have a look around? If there is something in those woods, you'd be safer if I took care of it." I'm certain. I was about to send him on his way a little more firmly when I realized it. There was a disturbance in his aura. Something had set its sights on him. "Were you followed here?" I asked sharply. "What? No. I don't think so. Did you encounter anyone on your way?" "A man wearing his kaftan crossed left over right." "What's a kaftan?" I ignored the question. "Did you maybe notice a flock of birds at some point?" "Yeah, sure, I mean, we're in the woods." "There are no birds in my woods anymore," I said sternly. "You're in danger. Something here's been following you." What? Aren't you a cryptid hunter? Shouldn't you know?" "Well, I haven't had many encounters yet." The man was starting to look panicked. "You're trying to get a rise out of me, aren't you?" His trembling voice told me he didn't actually believe that. "I'm most certainly not. Trust me. I can tell, I can always tell." You've gone and crossed a spirit. A spirit? So there's actual paranormal activity here. And you already knew. We need to get you out of here. I hissed. Come on, help me pack up. Douse the fire. He followed my instructions while I hastily gathered my belongings. Then, we took off running. I spurred him on, hoping to get back onto one of the beaten paths leading out to safety. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew my companion was so much more afraid. He had every reason to be, and deep down, he knew. I didn't know what he'd expected, coming here in search of a thrill, but this was most likely too much for him. What did you do? I panted, not daring to slow down. You must have done something to upset him. Did you try to fell a tree? I shot at a rabbit with my crossbow earlier. I only wounded it, though. It ran off on me, he gritted out in between gasps for air. Who's he? I really didn't see anyone around. He can come in a lot of shapes, oh for crying out loud, I snapped when he tripped over a root and fell, sprawling across the forest floor. I grabbed him and pulled him back up, grunting under his weight. He was heavy as fuck with all that gear on. The trees were starting to let up, though. Hope renewed, I steered the cryptid hunter towards the light beckoning through the leaves. Keep going. We're almost there. He wouldn't move. I gave him a bewildered frown. What are you doing? Keep running, you dumbass. You've been shitting me this whole time, haven't you? He asked sharply. There's nothing to run from, is there? Oh dear God. Keep running, I repeated. If you want to live, you need to get out. Look, lady, I'm not gonna play along anymore. You nearly scared me shitless back there, I'll admit that, but the fun's over. I'll get off your property, sure, but you could have just told me, you know. He fell silent upon realizing that my eyes were transfixed on something behind him. It stood tall between the trees, its enormous, branch-like antlers stretching up to disappear in the foliage. Its head bore more resemblance to the skull of a diseased deer, bone exposed with bloodied strips of flesh hanging off it. Its body overall was humanoid, with rough, thick bark replacing its skin. Moss lined its back and unproportionally long arms, twigs and leaves sprouted from its wide shoulders. It glared at us out of gleaming green eyes. The hunter slowly turned around to meet the creature's gaze. His face fell. Kneel, I breathed, sinking down and lowering my head. The young man didn't react at first. It's too late to flee, I repeated in a low voice. Kneel and pray for his mercy. Finally, he dropped to the ground next to me. The Leshy proceeded towards us, his steps completely silent. I had already had a few close encounters with this beast, and I had prayed not to evoke his wrath ever again. I could only hope I wouldn't be punished for the explorer's transgressions. I thought we had an understanding, you and I. The creature's voice chilled me like the icy forest wind. I felt one of its long, wooden fingers reach out to touch my face, tipping my chin up and forcing me to look up at it. Forgive us, my lord, I said quietly, holding the beast's gaze. Then will you let me have this mortal? My eyes began to fill with tears. I couldn't bring myself to respond. I'll ask you again, will you let me have this mortal? Please don't, I whispered. The man beside me had started to cry, sobs of fear shaking his shoulders. Sweet soul. You do so hate carnage. I'll allow you to avert your gaze while I feast. Grasped by utter hopelessness, I turned the other way, hugging myself as I shut my eyes. Gunshots rang out, their volume stinging my ears. The explorer was probably firing away for dear life, but the futility of defending oneself against this creature with simple bullets didn't go lost on him. "Hey lady, do something." He started tugging on my sleeve, but I brushed off his hand. "Help me. I'm sorry for everything, please just help me." I couldn't. Not anymore. My blood ran cold when the explorer let out a gurgling scream and was dragged away from my side. His cries of agony mixed with the sound of crunching bones, flesh and muscle being torn and blood spattering. I felt it hit my bare back, warm and sticky, staining my white gown. Tears were rolling down my cheeks and my lower lip was bleeding where I dug my teeth into it. By the time the horrific noises had finally died down, it felt like an eternity had passed. A satisfied growl rumbled somewhere behind my back. "Be on your way now, darling. And don't bother my animals with your weeping." I left without looking back. At home, I turned on the shower to sit and cry beneath it. I tried to tell myself that this cryptid hunter wasn't a great loss to the world, but even if his hobby of choice had frankly been dumb and ill-conceived, he'd probably still been a normal guy despite it all. That's what I thought about while I went around my property, searching for traces of his entrance. I found his vehicle, a beat-up brown pickup truck, on the outskirts of the eastern side of the plot of land. I disposed of it discreetly. Poor guy. He'd only wanted to see some action. Though it could be held against him that he'd never looked up what a leshy was. The first time I'd encountered the leshy, I had known what he, or rather it, was. My mother had warned me, telling me that, while benevolent at times, he and those of his kind had a habit of stealing young women. I held her teachings dearly, and I still do, seeing as I actually inherited our land from her side of the family. She educated me about these grounds, about the dangers within them. Even before she died, I would take long walks through the woodland, setting up camp here and there and basically spending all my free time in them. The winter around the same time that I started wearing my wedding dress, I was taking a walk to check out the grounds after the first snowfall. A thin, delicate layer of pristine white covered the treetops and meadows, offering a beautiful sight. All was well until I spotted a figure approaching from beyond the tree line. I stopped in my tracks. Nobody was supposed to be wandering around here except for myself and my family's employees, so either this guy had gotten lost, or he was one of the local entities. He drew nearer and nearer, stopping just a few feet ahead of me. Taking in his appearance, my heart sank. He was wearing a kaftan crossed left over right. His bearded face bore little trace of emotion and he was holding a large cudgel. When he spoke, it was in a deep, snarling voice with a Slavic accent. "I've seen you in my woods before. You're the heiress, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," I pressed out, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Then you must know who I am." "Yes, sir." "What am I to call you, heiress?" I hesitated. "I won't steal your name if you tell me," he said, as though he'd read my thoughts. "I'm Fiona," I said breathlessly. "You're very pretty." He tilted his head at me. "I could love you, if your eyes weren't so lifeless." He paused before shouldering the cudgel and walking onwards. "Send your mother my regards," he said over his shoulder as he passed me. Throughout our time as owners of the woods, the leshy has lured quite a few of our security staff members into traps. He'd lead them astray, they'd get lost in the woods and we'd find them drowned in the lake some time later. He did bring back my father's dog when it ran off that one time, though. Most of the time, he's neither hostile nor benevolent, but he is territorial. He likes to remind us of who's in charge. And of course, he'd have my head if I dared to disrespect him by putting a fence in his forest. He's not the only thing that might kill you when you enter our plot of land. And there's worse deaths than being eaten alive, believe it or not. You may have guessed it already, but this is a warning. Apparently, my property is being frequented by explorers or cryptid hunters. The guy that got eaten obviously couldn't have been the only one. Someone made us public. We're already implementing more security. This post serves two main purposes. First off, if you happen to be the person who first discovered these woods and shared their location online, please take it down. You're doing more harm than good. I don't know how you managed to make it out of here alive and unseen by me and my staff, but you got lucky. For your own sake, don't come back here. Secondly, and this is for all the others, if you've heard of my or any other haunted woods for that matter, don't go exploring. It's not worth it. Since you're so curious to see what's in here, I'll tell you online, at a safe distance. Fourth story. This story was shared girl_from_the_crypt. A warning to the wannabe cryptid hunters, Yuletide is dangerous around here. I've been scouring the internet, Reddit, 4chan, what have you. I've seen and read things I will never recover from, and I still haven't found the moron who doxed my haunted woods. It gets worse. 2 members of our security staff have since reported attempted entries. The would-be trespassers were guided off the property in both instances, but who knows how many might have slipped through the cracks. Please stop, people. Just stop. You're killing me. I'm tired, frustrated, exhausted, and I keep losing hair. I'm willing to bet a few corpses are going to show up in the springtime. All that snow and ice, once melted, are sure to reveal some gruesome sights. I've informed the personnel and told them to be on particularly high alert. We'll also be looking for new hires in the near future, once we're of means again. Right now, we're hemorrhaging money due to another ill-conceived business scheme my younger brother cooked up. Nothing worth explaining in any further detail, really. This is such a bad time for all of this, too. We're in more than enough trouble around Yuletide each year either way. Starting December 12th, one by one, the Yule lads have been arriving in town. They love harassing our estate in particular, always have. Thankfully, they'll all be gone again pretty soon. If you don't know about the Yule lads, lucky you. They're basically a bunch of pesky old bearded tricksters getting up to mischief around Christmas time. They each have their own thing going on. For example, there's the spoon licker, an eerie-looking, malnourished fellow who steals used spoons to lick food remnants off. Then you've got the door slammer, who runs around the house at night making a lot of noise to keep people from falling asleep. It was all good fun when we were little. My brothers and I would set up tripwires for the sheepcoat clod, a Yule lad with stiff peg legs who likes to harass sheep. We'd stay up all night, hiding in the pen, waiting for him to show up. We'd all laugh at him when he'd walk into our trap and fall. He'd turn red with anger and march off, grumbling and grouching and shaking his fist at us. We'd also jam the doors using rolled-up socks, stuffing them into that crack along the hinges. This meant that whenever the door slammer would try and do his thing, the door would give in just a little at first before whipping backwards, giving him a scare. So the Yule lads never gave us much of a fright. It was their mother we were more worried about. I only ever saw her twice, and that was more than enough for me. I wish we'd never had to find out about her at all. Since y'all are so interested in my forest and the hauntings, I'm going to make good on my promise from last time and feed you the story accordingly. A bit of background, I grew up as the oldest of 7 kids in total. Yup, 7. If you've ever wondered what life is like with 3 little brothers and sisters, it's, well, something. The boys and I got along famously for the most part, although we got into our fair share of fistfights. I never spent much time around the other girls. I don't know why, they just never struck the right chord with me. My brothers, however, adored me, and they always jumped at the chance to get up to some dumb shit together. There was Jeremy, the second-born, Casimir, and the youngest of the boys, Marion. We weren't particularly bad kids, just a little rebellious. Except for Marion. Despite being the baby of the family, or perhaps because of it, he tended to take things a little too far. He'd light poop on fire, hide dead mice in our parents' shoes like a cat, and trash the living room. I don't know why he did it. Not because we made him. The pranks we pulled as a group never targeted our parents, and we always kept any damage to the house minimal. We loved him, yes, but he could hardly be called a well-behaved child. He was more like one of the Yule lads himself. So one night, I must have been around 12, we were allowed to stay up a little later than usual to watch TV. They were screening some popular kids' movies at the time, so the 7 of us were all lying on the floor, each wrapped up in a warm blanket while Mom and Dad sat huddled on the couch behind us. It was so comfortable, sprawling on the soft bear-skin rug with the snow falling right outside our window. Everything was perfect, until the doorbell rang. I instantly jumped to my feet. Being the oldest, I always tried very hard to show the most initiative. Leadership qualities and stuff. Before Mom could stop me, I skipped over to the door and opened it as far as the chain holding it in place allowed. I was about to greet the newcomer and ask what business they had in our neck of the woods at this time of night, but my voice caught in my throat. It should. Mom replied testily. You think I was fine with it? Does that change anything? That she saw them? I don't think so. Mom sounded uncertain. At least, I don't know that it does. Not being too reassuring there, honey. Should I lie and tell you she doesn't freak me out? I've been afraid of her since forever. My parents used stories about her to scare me into behaving back when I was little. Scarred me for life. A chill ran down my spine and I drew away from the door. Sneaking down the corridor back towards my own bedroom, I was acutely aware of every little sound I made. The slapping of my naked feet on the carpeted floor and the beating of my heart both seemed to be amplified to an unnatural volume. I wanted nothing more than to find myself in the presumed safety of my sheets again, hiding under my blanket until daybreak. That's when I heard something, a tiny, muffled little grunt coming from Marion's room at the very end of the hallway. I stopped in my tracks, not daring to move a muscle. What was that sound? Had I misheard? Pulse thrumming in my ears, I stood and listened, still as a statue. There it was again. A dull thud, followed by a stifled whimper. I had to go and check it out. I figured my little brother was simply having nightmares like I did earlier, but somehow, I still didn't want to. Every single one of my limbs seemed to be opposed to the idea of going any further. Forcing my legs to move, I proceeded down the suddenly much longer seeming corridor until I reached Marion's room. I gently rapped on the door. No response. Everything had fallen silent inside. Marion? I whispered. Still nothing. I slowly nudged the door open, nimbly slipping through the crack only to come to a staggering halt the second I laid eyes on what was inside. There, in the middle of the room, stood this awful, terrifying woman. Her back bent to allow her to fit in under the ceiling at all, she glowered down at me from above. When she opened her mouth to speak, blood dripped from her long, lolling tongue and she stopped to lick her lips, smearing it all over her cheeks. "What's wrong, dear?" "I only took a morsel." With that, she raised her hand and before I could even fully process what I was seeing, I was already screaming. Her long, gnarled fingers were holding up my little brother's severed head by the hair. His lifeless, glassy eyes were staring right through me, his mouth contorted in a silent cry of fear. Cackling, Gryla dropped the head onto the floor and ducked to worm her way through the open window. I saw her running through the snow outside into the direction of the woods, her dirty gray shawl trailing after her and her laughter lingering in the chilly winter air. When my parents came storming in mere seconds later, my mother broke down instantly. Her wails of shock, of grief, loss and heartbreak were more harrowing than the voice of the giantess. I fell into my father's open arms, pressing myself against him as my body was shaken by sobs. We shut and locked the door behind us, to keep the other kids from coming in and seeing what was left of Marion. For a while, it was all we could do to sit and weep, all huddled up in a large, shivering pile. None of us got up, not even to close the window through which the cold wind was blowing in. Christmas time was never quite as much fun after that. No one ever set foot into Marion's room again. We buried his head out in the yard, then barricaded his chamber from the outside. That was it. Suddenly, my parents were short a child and I was without my little brother. A life had been erased, with nothing anyone could do about it. A fresh wound to each member of the family that couldn't be healed except through time. You'd think this tragedy would bring us closer together, but I actually believe that this was the night we all started alienating. My mother never let anyone in on her misery except me. To her, I was always the child who'd suffered the second most, the one who'd found Marion's head. She'd always wanted to make me the official heiress to the woods, and her decision only cemented itself through the bond we thus formed. She stopped doting on my siblings as much. She never neglected them, but made it clear I was her favorite. Dad started kind of resenting her for it, and by extension me. Yeah, I think that's how we all began drifting apart. We'd never grow back together. The big house would slowly empty, leaving only me and my staff. Recounting this has been painful, obviously. I hope you'll take it as another warning not to come here. Our property isn't a fun house or a Halloween attraction. I have dedicated my whole life to keeping this forest safe, to keep the things inside from spilling out, so please, have a little respect for my efforts. Just a tiny little bit. Fifth story. This story was shared Rishtu. Cryptid. When I was 16, I saw the movie Nightbreed. I was completely fascinated with the paranormal after that. Bigfoot, UFOs, possessions, and hauntings. I didn't really care, I wanted to learn everything I could about it. More importantly, though, I wanted it to be real. I wanted the world to be more than school, dating, and eventually jobs and marriage. It just seemed so damn boring to me. So I spent all my time looking for the real deal. A video, or picture that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was something more mysterious out in the world, and if I'm being honest, everything I saw was just some blurry picture of a shape, or a video that was clearly a hoax. The following was sent to me recently along with detailed information about the time, place, and individuals involved. It checks out. I'm not going to share the specific information I received, at least not until I get the chance to go and check this out for myself. The last thing I want is to help someone pull off a hoax. Okay, so this all started about 2 weeks ago when I got an email from a friend of mine, Jay, with a video file attached. The body of the email was short, sweet, and to the point. "Tony, you need to see this. Don't ask me where I got it. You don't want to know. Definitely don't ask me how I got it, that story is even worse. I've edited the 2 parts together, and now I'm sending it to you. After that, I'm burning my hard drive. I'm not answering any questions about this. Good luck, and if you have any intelligence, you won't watch this. Just delete it, and move on with your life. But if you really want to see how far the rabbit hole goes, this is where it probably starts. I've received weirder emails in my life, but this guy wasn't one of the tinfoil hat brigade. He was a cop in a small rural town that has had its fair share of strange disappearances, and odd calls. He always dismisses most of it as moonshine talk, but sends me some of the details of the more interesting occurrences. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the video he sent me. I transcribed it, but the transcription is so sterile, and doesn't really do it justice, so I tried to write out the non-verbal images as best I could in brackets. I'm no Stephen King, but I'm hoping you get the idea of what I saw. And no, I can't just upload the video. Not right now. The email Jay sent has me a little on edge. It's just not like him to be that dramatic, and I can't help but think about all the horror movies that start out with some idiot sharing a video, or heading off into the woods for that matter. So for now, this will have to suffice. Playback begins. This is clearly an interrogation room. 2 men sit on opposite sides of a table. One man who looks to be in his 20s sits opposite an older man in a suit. The younger man's face is badly bruised and cut. He stares at the table in silence for a minute, while the older man taps his pen lightly on a legal pad. It all went downhill so fast. 1 minute we were walking through the woods, bitching about life, and the next all hell breaks loose. The man sighs softly, clenching his fingers together to stop the shaking. It's not like in the movies, you know. There's no hushed moment when the forest stops, no cracking branches, nothing. It's just normal 1 second, and the next. He throws his hands up in a "what?" gesture. Why don't we start there? The cop jots down a note, as he looks up. All hell broke loose. What do you mean? The man sighs again, tears clearly on his face. He seemed oblivious to it, and continues speaking in a soft monotone. It was a camping trip. Me, Katie, Jeff, and Blair, and Steve just thought it would be fun to hang out over the weekend. So we headed up to Blah campsite. About midway through the hike Jeff was talking, and then it just exploded. The younger man begins. Exploded? Like a bomb exploded? The cop interjects. The sound, yeah. Just this huge, deep-throated boom that shook the air. But no fire. No bits of dirt or tree. Just this cloud of leaves, and then he was gone. The man stares down at the table. Who was gone? The cop. Jeff. He was standing and talking 1 second, and the next, he was just gone. No scream, no shouting, he just wasn't there anymore. The younger man. We all just stood there. I mean, what the hell are you supposed to do? And then Blair started screaming for Jeff, the rest of us sort of caught up and started moving again. Everyone went straight for where Jeff had been. There was this huge path carved out through it, that ran back into the next clearing, so I ran that way. He stopped speaking, reaching out for the coffee that sits on the table. Mindlessly he drinks it, clears his throat and then continues. I didn't really think about what I was doing. It just sort of happened. I was just running through this path carved out of the brush. No plan. Not even really an idea of where I was going, or what I was going to do when I got there. When I did get to the clearing, His words are broken by a choked sob. I found Jeff. He was. There were. He stops, a confused expression on his face. Something had torn him apart. I saw it. I mean, at first, I didn't. It was like my mind just couldn't understand it. Just patches of red, and dead tree limbs. Except it wasn't tree limbs. He trails off for a moment, his lips tightening to a thin line, his voice coming out as whisper. It was his arms. And legs. The younger man looks up, catching the gaze of the cop. He looks confused, and in pain. Have you ever seen that before? It looks just like a paper doll torn apart. How do you fix that? The cop nods sympathetically, urging the man to continue. I could see what was left of his body at the gnarled trunk of a tree. His head just lolled to one side, but he had this look of surprise. Like he just couldn't believe what had happened to him. Was that when you decided to leave? The cop. The man shakes his head. Not at first, no. Blair lost it. I mean, who wouldn't? He finishes with a weak, humorless laugh. Katie tried to take care of her while Steve and I talked. Neither of us really had any idea what happened, but we both agreed we needed the cops. It took maybe 20 minutes to get Blair to a point where she could move. Part of me got mad, you know. He looks at the cop with a guilty expression. We needed to leave. Now. And she was just, on her knees sobbing. The man stops, running his hands through his hair, as he hangs his head. I was just scared. I wanted us to get out of there. So I yelled at her to get off her ass and move. She looked at me. With so much hate. I didn't care. If she got up and moved, she could hate me all she wanted. So, we started the hike back. At first it was just this sheer terror that made us run until we couldn't breathe, and then, nothing happened, so we slowed down. But every sound, every shadow. He trails off before continuing. And then it was like we were all in this mind fog. Like the world had stopped being real. I was just watching my life from the outside. Nobody said anything. We just stared straight ahead and forced our bodies forward. The man chews his lip for a moment. And then it happened again. The cop cocks his head to the side for a moment. How long was it, before the second time? I don't really know. The man frowns thoughtfully. Time just kinda didn't exist. But we couldn't have been on the trail for more than half an hour. The cop nods, scribbling something down before looking up. What happened the second time? 1 minute we were walking, and the next I was in the air. It was just this confused mass of leaves, dirt, us. And it. The cop frowns. It. I didn't really see it, except out of the corners of my eye. But it was huge. And it stunk. The man's nose wrinkles. Like, if you crossed the smell of a ferret with a skunk. Sickly sweet and musky. Then just this warm wetness all over me, and intense pain in my face. The cop motions with the pen. Is that where you got the black eye? The man's hand reaches up, fingers tentatively touching his eye. I have a black eye. The cop nods. I guess. The man's hand traces over his heavily bruised eye, wincing slightly. He looks at his hands as if they somehow caused it, and begins to speak again. After that, things just kind of sped up. I remember hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of me. It took me a couple of minutes to get my breath back, and stop the ringing in my head. After that, The man stops, takes a deep breath as tears begin to well. It was Katie and Blair. I couldn't even see all their parts. The last comes out as a whisper. I got up, confused, trying to understand what the hell was going on. But I just couldn't. It didn't make any damn sense. Steve was yelling at me, but he sounded like he was a million miles away. His head was still throbbing, and these black spots were all over my vision. And then Steven slapped me, and it all came back. You with me? Steve was shouting at me. I nodded, and he grabbed me by the collar, dragging me down the path. He said we were getting out of there, and we were going to run, so drop my pack. I was shrugging out of it when something grabbed my pack. It jerked me right off my feet, and I mean hard. I hit the ground, but this time I was up on my feet just as quick. The pack fell off with the shoulder straps torn away. At first I thought I had been dragged back from the trail, but then I saw Cat. I saw the girls. I swung my head around trying to find Steve, and caught a glimpse of him diving into the bush. The man stares sightlessly at the floor. Then I just ran. He whispers. I ran as fast and as hard as I could. I left them there. The man's eyes burn in shame as his face freezes. The video cuts out, and then starts again. This time the view is from behind a man and a woman. They are watching the interrogation from behind the glass and never turn to face the camera. The woman glances down at something in her lap and then looks up at her companion. She pauses for a moment. We should send him back. The results might prove interesting if not fruitful. He picks up his phone and holds it to his ear after a moment before speaking. Proceed. Then the video ends. I'm almost 100% certain that the man doing the interview was Jay. What confuses me is the other two. They don't act like cops, but I suppose they could be. Either way, Jay included some GPS coordinates of where this guy says he saw the thing. I'm going. It's arguably the dumbest thing I have ever done in my life, but if there is something out there, really something out there, then it's worth the risk. I'll keep you updated if I find out more. Sixth story. This story was shared LaSalle 8. I hired some cryptid hunters. Okay, need to vent and get you all caught up on the events that led to the shit show that was the past few days. I am originally from this backwoods town in the Northeast and regularly visited until about a year and a half ago when I inherited some property in this podunk town. I am starting to think the way that I inherited this property might have been more sinister than previously thought. On the property is a house with two lovely tenants that have been a godsend to me. I am also dating their daughter, and on the edge of the property there is a bungalow up on some cylinder blocks that has been a hard times fallback for my family that I thought I could rent. When I tried to rent it, a creature I call Sam killed my tenant's dog and then stalked the poor man and drove him insane. He now lives in a nursing home. Trying to fix it up, on Halloween, after the poor guy trashed it, I experienced a number of supernatural occurrences and found myself going insane myself. I trying to murder a lamp under the delusion I was in a relationship with a chair that was cheating on me with said lamp. Got locked up in Fort Wynn's mental facility, went broke, and finding myself on hard times had to move into said bungalow. While living in this town, I have witnessed a few supernatural events on Honey Hollow Road. Attempted to summon a demon at my friend Carter's house. I am starting to think it may have worked. Had the fishing trip from hell. Found my dead childhood best friend working at one of the local liquor stores, and I think I may have somehow killed him, not the first time he died. And finally my friends and I attempted to hunt that damn thing I call Sam and nearly lost my current best friend Carter, and may have seen more supernatural occurrences, but those also might have been a concussion. And this whole time that goddamn thing Sam has been stalking me, leaving dead animal at my front door, which feels very threatening, scratching at night and never letting me have a good night's sleep. So now it's come to me having to hire some self-proclaimed cryptid hunters that Carter knows and claimed to have hired at some point. All the hell that I have been through failed to prepare me for this. I was visiting Carl at the house and asking for his permission to do something important. We noticed a large truck pull up to my bungalow and went out to greet the alleged cryptid hunters. 2 men got out. I still cannot believe these guys even exist. They are like poorly written characters from a comic. One was tall and had a very lean muscular build, wore a pair really tight jean shorts, an even tighter wife beater, the spitting image of white trash, that I could actually see his 8-pack through, a backwards cap, and boots. He called himself Clint Cletus. He spoke undeservingly confident in some sort of fast broken English, like if he wanted to be a NASCAR announcer but received any sort of education. The second guy looked like a short, burly, roided-up gorilla that slouched forward and had extremely long, muscular arms, pale skin, and his head had shoulder-length unkempt blonde hair that he continuously had to shake away from his eyes, and a bushy blonde beard that I feel like he never as much as trimmed. Basically the second guy's head looked like a yellow tumbleweed. He spoke in a low yet shockingly loud voice and in a manner that makes me think he is, well, touched in the head, and called himself Otis Hickey. Like I said, poorly written characters that I cannot believe exist. We met halfway between the house and bungalow and began talking about the job. After I gave them the rundown about Sam, they turned to their right and Clint asked, "So watch how think it is Toby?" I turned to notice an extremely tall, extremely muscular man wearing nothing but some sort of loose black skirt thing had suddenly appeared. Had he been laying in the truck bed? Where did he come from and how didn't we notice this giant of a man approaching? He was clean shaven and had long black hair that flowed in a way that mesmerized me in some weird way that I just can't explain. I looked to Carl and he seemed as shocked as I was to see the man. "My name is," Toby began before Clint cut him off. "Yeah, we know Kunta Kinte, what's hit?" I could feel everyone including me having a burning desire to punch Clint in his face. "It is unknown to us, familiar," Toby sternly declared while staring at me, or perhaps, through me. "Wah. You know what hit is or not?" Clint asked. There was an awkward silence and we all just stood there nervously for a while, with the exception of Toby who stood stern, staring through me with a piercing gaze. The silence was broken by Carter and his girlfriend Ashley pulling up. Carter got out, covered in band-aids, and said with a big smile, "So you met the hunters." He exchanged some weird handshake with Clint and Otis while gave Toby a wave while blatantly avoiding him, clearly afraid of him. And as Ashley came around the truck to greet everyone, Clint uttered, "Sits her," and he took some weird pose as if he was mocking karate. Otis took an actually karate pose, and even Toby changed his stern pose as if he was preparing to fend off an attack. Carter calmed everyone down, but they clearly remained leery of this small blonde girl dressed in pink. "Back ta business, you wanna buy some werewolf urine and tough hair to ward Falker off or you want us ta kill et?" asked Toby. His speech is torture to my ears. "It needs to die," I declared. Carter insisted he wanted it dead as well and would be joining the hunt. We devised some plans and broke up into teams. Toby was with Carl, Clint with Carter and Ashley. I felt really bad for them, but if I was stuck with him I very well might end up hurting Clint, and I was with Otis. We each got some bait that was supposedly from something that I don't think Clint actually knew how to pronounce and went into 3 sections of the woods. Carter's team took the side closest to the bungalow, Toby's team was the furthest point out, and Otis and I took the mid-section of the woods. Surprise! We found more rectangular grave-like holes. Other than that, nothing out of the normal occurred for the first hour. On the second hour we got the feeling there was something watching us. We decided to put out our bait and wait. The feeling of being watched was getting to me. I began having flashbacks of Carter being attacked by Sam. Envisioning Carter dead, decapitated, with Sam feasting on his body, Sam smiling, proud of the kill. And when I hit my lowest mental point, as if right on cue as always, we saw Sam darting from tree to tree, sneakily heading towards the bait. When he got to the bait, Otis took a shot, but Sam somehow dodged and began to close in on us, using trees for cover. It lunged at Otis, but he grabbed it with one of his freakishly long powerful arms and flipped it over himself and into a tree. I was too horrified to even move, but luckily Otis is a total badass. He kept taking different martial art poses and deploying expertly applied tosses and throws, never allowing Sam to lay a scratch on him. He masterfully sidestepped Sam's long powerful tail with ease, only exerting the minimal effort. If I wasn't scared stiff I may have thought that it would be entertaining to watch this with some popcorn, but images of the dead Rottweiler and Carter kept seeping into my mind, paralyzing me with fear. Eventually, I noticed Otis's eyes under his hair and realized he was terrified, and despite how easy he made it look, he was afraid and fighting for his life, waiting for me to help him. But I couldn't bring myself to do anything. He began to show fatigue, labored breathing, and I, crippled by fear, was powerless to save him. A shot rang out, and a pink blur flashed past and hit Sam for a home run right into a tree. It was stunned. The pink blur was Ashley, and her bat was her rifle. She took aim at the dazed Sam, but his tail slapped her rifle and she missed the shot. It lunged at her, but again in mid-air, Otis grabbed his tail. He had caught his breath and regained his composure. He began whipping Sam around by his tail, occasionally slamming him on the ground or into a tree. On one of his slams to the ground, Ashley stomped on his back and held him down. She took him right at the back of Sam's head. Sam looked right at me and smiled, then tugged Otis into Ashley with his tail, knocking both down, and darted for me. One hand around his neck and the other pushing away his body, I struggled. Sam snapping at me, slashing my arms and face with his claws. I did all I could to fend off his savage flurry. I saw Otis stand up and start to approach, only to barrel over as if something had knocked him down. Sam's tail, without a doubt. Sam missed a snap at me, but I felt his cold wet nose touching mine with the miss. I powered him back with all my might but had no way to fight back. Suddenly a giant black thing grabbed Sam in its jaws. A giant black dog, no, not a dog, a massive black wolf. It whipped Sam around with its teeth, tearing into Sam as he let out a loud hissing sound. It carried him into the darkness of the woods. Sam's tail and the wolf's long black mane seemingly hypnotized me. Ashley helped Otis up to his shock and horror. I began to work my way up to my feet and the hissing stopped. I heard an animal rushing at my side. Sam. The wolf. I began to turn my head to see what awaited me, but suddenly I felt pressure on my chest and my body was lifted upright into the air. I found no monster but Toby putting me on my feet. We needed to regroup and get a handle of the situation, so we ran back to the house, Ashley up front, followed by Otis, then me, and Toby took the rear. When we left the woods, the wolf raced past me and right past the others and right past the trucks and disappeared. Carl, Carter, and Clint were calling us over. When I made it to them, I looked back for Toby, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Is everyone all right?" Toby's voice echoed behind me. "How did he get past me? Did he pass by me as I turned to look for him?" We went over the events and Clint declared he had a strat orgy and insisted that we leave the rest to the three hunters. Seeing how both Carter and I both almost died on encounters with that damn thing and the three's reluctance to even be near Ashley, we felt we had no choice but to agree. That night, the scratching finally stopped. In the morning, no dead animals. I knew it was over. But I hadn't heard from the hunters either. Days passed before Otis showed up and handed me a black fur rug. I attempted to ask where the others were, but he just gave me the saddest look. I knew one if not both of them had died fighting Sam. I brought up the reminder their payment, but he shook his head and shoved the rug against my chest, trying to get me to take it. Then he simply turned and walked away. I often wonder what horrific fate befell those brave, amazing, cryptid hunters. And wonder, or wish, that I had taken the werewolf urine to repel that damn thing, if they would still be here. 7th story. This story was shared dogs 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. My most terrifying hunt as a cryptid hunter. Alright, hey guys, it's me Hector again. Lately I've been getting a lot of requests to tell the most moment terrifying I've ever had as a cryptid hunter. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this was one of the toughest nights for me as cryptid hunter. Let me tell you where it happened. It was in my early years. I had just gotten off a mission to deal with an ancient werewolf that I beat with my blessed silver tomahawk and a silver machete with liquid wolfsbane on the blade, so I was feeling like a badass and was feeling like I could take on anything the world could throw at me. I was your typical rookie. I acted on action and impulse instead of thought and feeling. I got a mission from my superiors to go to a desert in Arizona to investigate a case of hikers turning up with the lower part of their body, heart, brain and intestines missing. After reading the case, I thought, oh, the must be your run-of-the-mill skinwalker, so I packed my hunting gear and headed out. It took me 4 hours to get to the desert, and I made camp in a miniature cave with a nice source of water by it and started a fire so I could start cooking the food I bought with me, bison steak with a side of sweet potatoes, my favorite. I decided I would start looking for evidence tomorrow. I went to sleep and had a weird dream that night. I had a dream that I was looking at my tent that night. Later I hiked 4 miles from my campsite and I came upon a body. This was a male body, could have been no older than 24. He was black, must have been of Native American descent. In his heart he had an ancient looking knife sticking out of it. His tongue was missing, and most disturbing, his genitals had been mutilated. His face showed the amount of pain he was in before he died. I closed his eyes and gave him a proper burial. I took the knife as evidence, and on it said the word Adanaquitisti. I knew that word. It meant hate in Cherokee. Someone or something had killed this poor man in an act of sick hatred. I'm not gonna lie, this shook me a bit. I continued on being careful because I could have swore that while I was burying him I heard faint whisper in the wind that chilled me to the bone. The sun was going down and I decided to go back to camp. That night I dreamt of myself watching my tent again, except I was getting closer. The next day I woke up to a terrible sight. Something had mounted a dead fox on a cactus, skinned it and left in front of my tent. I thought to myself, this isn't your ordinary skinwalker. To be honest, I didn't know what this thing was. I got my gear and headed out for another investigation while watching my back the whole time. I got back a night to the cave to see that my camp had been ransacked and the thing that had done it left footprints. These footprints shifted from animals to man in a disturbing fashion. I followed them to an ancient-looking temple that looked to be of Mayan origin. I walked in and was immediately filled with fear. The walls, oh God, the walls, they were decorated with the crucified bodies of humans. Their eyes were missing. The floors were painted with the blood of the poor victims of this creature. It had also took the skulls out of its victims and mounted them on a stick with the rest of their skeletal system like some sick scarecrow. The bodies were so decomposed that even maggots wouldn't even dare touch them. I've never seen so much evil. This place oozed black magic, and I knew deep down I had to stop this thing, whatever it was. I made myself progress, and there I saw it sitting on a throne of human skulls eating a bowl of human hearts. A Hawaii Chivo. This was an evil sorcerer who can transform himself or herself into a supernatural animal, usually a goat, dog or deer, in order to prey upon livestock, but this one had explored the realm of the occult and through that had gotten bold and started to prey on humans. This thing had migrated from southern Mexico through unknown means and taken up refuge in an ancient Mayan temple in Arizona. This half-man, half-beast creature, with burning red eyes, looked into my soul and made my spirit twitch. I quickly took out an arrow and shot it in the shoulder. It didn't like that it pounced on me with such ferocity. I thought I was done, for it grabbed by my neck and looked me into the eyes, and I slowly felt my soul being consumed by this monster. I think stabbed it in the stomach with my machete, and that caused it to reel back in pain due to the wolfsbane. This thing had lived hundreds of years studying black magic, so I knew I had to make this quick or things would turn ugly. I shot one last arrow into its body and it collapsed and took off deeper into the temple, and that was when I saw the features of it. It looked like a baboon crossed with a silverback gorilla. It was about 6 feet 0 inches tall with long claws and jet black fur and sharp jagged teeth. I could tell that the poor bastard of a warlock had lost its human form long ago. I caught up with it and almost ended its suffering when it uttered ancient dialect, and then the horror show began. The bodies fell from the wall and started advancing towards me. Oh shit, I said as so readied my tomahawk and machete. It was a bloody fight that lasted 2 hours. I collapsed to the floor after the last zombie and woke up in a dark void. That was when I knew that this thing had taken the fight to my subconscious. I should have known all along that it was this thing watching me sleep in my tent, and that I was looking through its eyes on those nights I had those dreams. It was then the bastard staring, using my own thoughts against me. It appeared and took the form of my great-grandpa and impersonated him to try to get to me. Tears came to my eyes and rage filled my body. I fought this thing with all the rage I had. I threw my weapons away and reverted to using my fist. I was a machine. I was going to town on this thing, and when I woke it was dead. I bagged the big bastard and used some minerals around the area so make a makeshift explosion and blew the temple sky high. The evil energy in that place could not be allowed to surge through this land, so I purified it best I could. I burned the piece of shit warlock's heart and put his ashes in a silver urn blessed by a Native American chief and stored it somewhere where no one could access it. I reported to my seniors and I decided to request time off. That hunt took a lot of me. I was granted leave and I went to go visit my great-grandfather's grave. I paid my respects and I left black roses on his grave. After that hunt I started to be more analytical of situations instead of ask questions later. As much as I hate to admit it, it helped me grow as a hunter and taught me a valuable lesson in the end: to never take anyone in your life for granted. I'm grateful my great-grandfather taught me everything I knew and I miss him every day. 8th story. This story was shared Reflexi 0N. We found a dead Wendigo on my grandpa's property. For those involved in dealing with cryptids, if any of you are reading this, why do you do it? Other than the money, of course, I feel a lot of you do it for the rush. The adrenaline. But where's the line drawn? Where does exhilaration evolve into panic? Don't get me wrong, a little risk-taking is food for the soul, but so many factors can go wrong in any situation. In particular, what do you do when you find the corpse of a cryptid you were hunting, eviscerated and dismembered? When the abrupt realization hits you that there's a bigger fish. My grandpa wasn't quite on the level of monster hunting, but boy was he a crazy motherfucker. Once, he hunted a grizzly using nothing but a crossbow, wet mud and leaves, and his wit. He's had its head mounted above his forest house fireplace ever since. I can't say how far back his love for the wilderness is rooted, but I know he grew tired of the city long before retiring from his job as a metropolitan engineer. Since then, he's lived out in an old house, in the northwestern reaches of the Olympic National Forest, about 40 miles from the park itself, Washington State. I can only imagine how lonely it must have been, living out there by himself, but he never seemed any the worse for it. In recent years, I've come to be good friends with a guy I met in college, Martin. I could see the same fire in his eyes as my grandpa's when it came to the outdoors, always pestering me to come with on camping trips, going fishing, hunting, you name it. It was a no-brainer bringing him along for a visit to my grandpa's. Honestly, I feared they might get along too well, and Martin would never return with me. In the end, it didn't matter, because both of us have been ingrained with a morbid aversion to the woods since that day. Martin was particularly eager this time, practically vibrating in the passenger of my Jeep. Last trip, Grandpa promised he'd show him the ropes of skinning in pelts. Martin often went on about how he'd feel sitting affront a roaring fireplace with a great deerskin rug laid out beneath it. My motivation was simply to check up on my grandpa. He hadn't been responding to my attempts at contacting him for the past week, so naturally I was a bit worried. We ran into a problem early, driving up the long dirt road to my grandpa's. Rounding a corner, I slammed on the brake seeing a slew of fallen trees lying across the road. Damn! What happened here? Martin exclaimed, there haven't been any storms recently, right? I sat with my hands 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, lost for words. No, it's been pretty clear weather round these parts since March. Weird. Shutting the engine off, I hopped out of the Jeep. The only sounds were the leaves, flittering in the mid-spring breeze. Nature's white noise. We were a little over 2 miles away from the house, an easily walkable distance. Grandpa had enough equipment that we didn't need to bring much of our own, so our bags were light. I had my phone, a flashlight, water, spare clothes, and my utility watch strapped around my wrist. My plan was to get up to Grandpa's, and come back down in his truck to chop up the fallen logs with a chainsaw. We thought it would be more fun to go through the woods alongside the track. A long dirt road means only boredom, after all. We scrambled down the left side slope and began our trek, keeping an eye on the road to follow its route. Only a few minutes later, the smell hit us. Putrid carrion. It was nothing unexpected, animals in the forest die all the time. Even so, that hardwired part of my brain was repulsed at the smell. Shit, something's festering out here, I said, can't imagine how it'd smell in summer. Martin let out a small retch, but agreed. The stench only grew stronger as we went on. It was at its peak when I almost tripped over a sharp object on the ground. I thought it to be a cluster of branches at first, but the notion quickly dissolved upon seeing their pale, ceramic reflections. A decapitated stag's head lay right in front of us. It was wrong, though. The teeth were too long, and the bone of its face was exposed. Even with the odor, I could tell it was fresh from the viscous black blood that seeped from its neck and mouth. Martin spoke up, "God damn, that's freaky. You think a bear did this? I mean, there's only black bears here, right? I doubt they could pull off something like this. A cougar, maybe. I don't know." Never seen one straight up decapitate a stag like this, though. My eyes were drawn to a trail of blood, forming a jagged streak ahead of us on the ground. My gaze followed it, until it terminated at the stag's grisly mess of a body. Well, it looked quadrupedal from a distance, but as we moved closer, I found myself sorely incorrect. The body was that of a monster. Large in stature, but bony and gaunt. Long, razor-sharp claws lying splayed across the ground like kitchen knives. And all covered in patches of dark wizened fur. "Is it bad?" Martin called out, approaching from behind me to get a look. When he saw it, he went still and quiet, as had I. There was no statement that could do the sight justice. I'd heard the old tales of the horrors lurking deep inside the forests, but never experienced them face to face. It was still, laying dead as the fallen leaves beneath it. It looked crushed and broken, littered with what seemed to be wide and deep puncture wounds. Martin managed to speak up. "Is that?" But before he could say any more, a sudden snap broke the tension. The snap of a twig, no, a branch. My spine shot straight upright. Against my better judgment, I found my head gradually swiveling in the direction the noise had come from. When I caught a vast, hulking shape in my peripheral, I whipped around to face whatever was there. I saw something, just for a moment. Enormous, long limbs draped in shaggy hair, the color of pine bark. But as quickly as I'd turned, the image vanished. Rising dread threatened to pry my lips apart in a scream. I looked far and wide, but nothing was there. "Kel, what is it?" "Wait, the cougar isn't still here, is it?" Martin whispered. "No, it's nothing. Let's keep going, we can talk about this later with my grandpa." But the cat could still be loitering about somewhere. It's best we don't stay in the same place for too long. Before departing, I snapped a few pictures of the mangled corpse on my phone, zooming in on the head without backtracking to get a better angle. Something told me that turning back, however briefly, would be a terrible mistake. We went on with urgent pace, pretending to ignore the heavy movements between the trees nearby. Large animals will inevitably give away their movements, but they snap twigs, not entire branches. Even so, the movements sounded anything but clumsy. No, they sounded calculated, those of a stalking predator. As hard as I tried to filter them out, I caught myself glancing to the sides and behind very often. I don't know whether I was hoping to see something, or nothing. Still, the woods around us were empty, other than ourselves. "Hey, Kel, if there's a mountain lion around here, we should go up onto the road for a bit. It'll be easier to bolt if we need to." I agreed, and we veered off to the right, climbing up the roadside slope. Deep down I knew that whatever was out there, it wasn't a big cat. We only told ourselves that, skirting the subject of monsters now made very real to us. The forest fell silent as we walked along the road. That was far from being comforting, though. If the woods are quiet, predators are about. It's a well-known idea in the community of wilderness enthusiasts. What did ease my mind to a degree was the sight of a herd of deer standing in the track. They cocked their heads to look at us, but didn't seem all too disturbed by our presence. At the same time, a feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, grew as a hard lump in my gut. They started to move on as we got closer, wandering off the road and into the woods. One of the deer stayed in place. It wasn't frozen, no, but constricted. It twitched and whimpered as it started to rise off of the ground, as if weightless. It happened so quickly. Its screams were cut off as its limbs were snapped and crushed, and deep wounds erupted over its body. And then, like it had been there the whole time, it stood. It was a nightmare. Huge, unimaginably so, rivaling 2 elephants stacked up. It was hunched over, resting on impossibly long and thick forelimbs ending in spindly, sloth-like claws. Its body was long too, ending in a pair of shorter legs, knees inverted with feet supported by spur-like appendages. The lolling head that sat atop an arched neck looked like some bizarre cross between a horse and a crocodile. Hollow pits in place of eyes, the torn skin around its mouth revealing horribly uneven and misshapen teeth that jutted out at irregular angles. The fading sunlight glinted off of the long gashes covering its sides and head. The dead creature from earlier had definitely put up a fight. But it could never have been enough. As we stood, stunned, it reciprocated our stare, the only real movements being the sets of rib-like appendages undulating on its underside, rendering the deer into a torn sack of flesh and bone fragments. The poor animal seemed to wither before our eyes as the sharp ribs forced deeper into its body, like a juice box having the last drops sucked out of it. In that moment, we were part of the herd. Paralyzed. Some had already run off, but others were as statues in the presence of this beast. Another smell hit us then, different from the stench of decay like earlier, but equally as sickening. Like moist earth, sulfur, methane, and dead fish. Its source was clear as wisps of gas from the beast's mouth became thick, billowing fumes, rising into the evening sky. The tension was broken with the deer's mutilated husk thudding to the ground. The remaining deer took flight, scampering off into the trees, and in response the beast snapped its head in their direction. Something was wrong with its head, flopping around clumsily as it turned. I took a step back as it let out a deep, guttural rattle, before bounding off after the herd, its matted hair swinging violently. It splintered a tree as it went, but was totally unfazed by the impact. We waited until its thundering gallops faded into the quickly darkening night before saying anything. What the fuck, what the fuck? What was that thing? Martin sputtered, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't know, man, but we have to get to the house before sundown. I have a feeling our chances at escaping it are little to none in the dark. Are you crazy? We have to go back. I want to get as far from this place as Padash. What about my grandpa? We can't just leave him here with that thing. Martin didn't look over to me, but wasted no time disagreeing, starting his jog up the road. We were already over halfway to my grandpa's house, and even if we wanted to escape, it would be a menial task for the creature to smash the jeep off-road. The solitary light in the distance looked like the gates of heaven. It radiated safety. But I knew we couldn't continue out in the open, completely exposed. I looked down to my utility watch, making a mental note of the direction of the house, north-northeast, before grabbing Martin by the arm and leading him off the left side of the road. Nature's cruel irony manifested in the steepening terrain and the thickening brush. The house's light quickly faded, leaving us with only our bearings to navigate. I thought we might have gone off track for a terrifying moment, but I saw the column of smoke above the distant tree canopy that could only be from my grandpa's chimney. Come on, this way. As we neared, no light became apparent. Maybe he'd already gone to bed. I could only guess with his lack of communication. We came up onto the lip of a hill, sloping down towards a flat clearing. But there was no house. There, the pillar of smoke, but there was no source. It began in mid-air from nothing. As we stopped to look, the point where the smoke came from jerked around in the air. When I picked up on the organic stench, it clicked in my mind. Just like before, there it was, looking directly at us, the thick fumes spewing from its mouth. But I noticed something else this time. Now that the moon hung in the sky, its light glinted off of something beneath the creature's head. 6 black orbs, shiny like obsidian, 3 on either side of its neck. They darted about, independent of each other, and I knew immediately what they were. Eyes. What kind of abomination was this? If those were its eyes, and it ate the deer with that structure resembling a ribcage, then that must mean it had a false head. A distraction, defense mechanism maybe. It made sense how this head flopped around limply with the beast's unnatural movements. I blinked in quick succession, and looked down to my watch. Due east. We had been misled. It had circled around us to lie in wait. In one motion, I gripped onto Martin's shoulder and pulled him in the direction we were meant to be heading in a wild sprint for survival. The beast erupted into movement, ribs rippling as it let out another rumbling trill. Martin looked over to me, confused. "Hey, dude, what are you doing? There's nothing to dash." "Shut up. Just run as fast as fucking possible, now, don't stop for anything." Our pounding feet were matched by heavy thumps and loud cracks of trees being smashed. I dared not steal a glance behind, fearing that even the slightest break in pace would mean death. There. I struggled to see what Martin was talking about, until the yellow light became visible between the tree trunks. We were only a few hundred yards away, but I was surprised the creature hadn't already caught up to us. Even the trees in its way stood no chance at impeding it. It had, almost, caught up. I could feel the air pressure from its massive body, charging through the trees behind. Close enough that, at any moment, I might feel its claws cleave my body into pieces. A saving grace. Coming up on our left was a dense patch of old oak trees. I swerved towards them, leaping through the spaces between trunks, just large enough for us to get through. I hit the ground, rolling sideways. There wasn't even time to be dazed as an immense slam sounded from where we'd just been. I scrambled backwards, looking to see a great arm slinking through the gap. It was thick, but not as thick as the oaks. The claws tapped about, searching blindly for our frail bodies. "Go!" I shouted, and the both of us shot to our feet and bolted towards the light. As we ran, the sounds grew distant. Was it stunned, or did it still think we were behind those trees? I didn't care. All that mattered was being inside and not out. Gravel clattered against the front of the house as we skidded to a stop. I rapped on the door, devolving into pounding when they went unheard. On what was probably the 20th knock, my fist met only air, and I stumbled in through the now open doorway. I looked up to meet my grandpa's gaze. His eyes were wild. He didn't look like himself. He glanced behind me at Martin, then behind him. Whatever he saw out there, his pupils contracted in response. "Hurry, boys, get inside," he whisper-shouted. We filed in, and he went to bolt the door, but hesitated. His hand fell limply, no use. He was right, if the beast wanted to pay a visit, it would do so regardless of our home security. We followed him quietly to an uncovered floor hatch. "What's this, Mr. Barnett?" Martin asked, regarding the hatch. "Huh? Oh, this here's my old wine cellar." Martin went to ask further before being interrupted. Get down the ladder first, son. You can shoot your questions once we're safe." He pulled on a handle, opening the hatch to reveal a sturdy wooden ladder that led into a dim space beneath. One by one, We clambered down its dusty rungs, meeting the cold concrete floor at the bottom. Grandpa was last, tugging a heavy rug over the open hatch, before closing and securing it. I take it you've seen the thing, right? Jesus, Granddad, we barely got away, I gasped, still out of breath from our escape. Unscathed? Yeah, mostly, other than some scratches. Good. He walked over to an upturned crate and plopped down onto it. Martin and I looked between each other, then back at him. Well. Martin said, you seem to know what we were dealing with, so what the hell is it? Grandpa gave Martin a scowl of disapproval, quickly relenting into understanding. I'd scrutinize you on your manners, boy, but now ain't the time. He released a tired gasp, letting his head drop down, before inhaling sharply and looking back up at us. I seen it only once before, in my varsity years. Had some Danish friends on my course who said I should come visit them over there, go and do some backpacking in their home country. Beautiful landscapes over in Denmark, really. Peaks rising out of the trees, you know. Before he could lose himself in a daydream, I cleared my throat to bring him back to reality. Oh, right. So, we were pretty deep in the woods when it happened. We'd all gotten paranoid, 'cause we thought something was following us. Something big, elk maybe. But we never saw nothing, only heard it. And then, God, one of the girls in front of me started to, levitate. I dunno, she was just rising up off the ground, gripped by something. Whatever it was made a mess from her. Crunched her up like a meatball being squeezed. I saw it then. Curved bones wrapped around her, stabbed in deep. Ain't never gonna forget the sight of it, it's like a stain on my mind. We saw the same thing, Martin piped up, only it was a deer. Looked like it sucked everything out of it when it was done. Yeah, I can't say I know how it works. You can only see it if you know something's there. If it's there. Anyway, we ran as fast as we could back down the trail, and we seemed to lose it. The whole time there was this rancid stink though, eggy and earthy. Ugh. We wound up back in the town we'd started from, went straight to the police station and reported it. Apparently all they found was a little chunk of meat, piece of thigh or something like that. One of the other guys told me about the tale later on. He brought up the smoke we saw rising out of the forest, when we were back in the town. An old Danish legend went that people through history seen smoke columns in the woods, and most who went to check it out never returned. They said it would move around, not like how a fire would spread, but like it was wandering to and fro. Damn, that's a horrible story, Grandpa, I said. It doesn't help us figure out what it is though. We already know the stuff you've just told us. Well, he replied, I'm sure it's got many names, seein' how it can just pop up where it likes. But I only heard it called the skorstender. Means chimney beast, if I'm remembering right. That makes sense. We thought we were seeing the smoke from your chimney, but it led us right to it. Kel, Grandpa sighed, this house ain't even got a chimney. Martin looked over to me, scoffing, then back over to Grandpa. So it lures people in like that? Sure, but I don't think it means to. I'ma take a gander and say it started up with the fumes after it ate that deer. Yeah, I replied. Whatever that thing is, it ain't from here. It ain't from anywhere on the planet, I think. It eats something, then starts giving off smoke. Waste product from digesting, I'd guess. So, shit gas. Martin chuckled. He always was able to find a way to lighten the mood in dire situations, even if just a little. I looked up at the monochrome ceiling above us, mulling over what Grandpa had said. I remembered how this whole thing had started, and pulled out my phone to bring up my photos. We found this after starting our way up to yours on foot. I have an inkling, but do you know what it is? Grandpa squinted at the screen, then took it from my hand. Scroll to the right, that's only the head, I said. His silent focus was only punctured by the dull taps of his finger on the screen. Recognition lit up in his eyes, his head bobbing up and down. Well, I'll be damned. Wendigo, right? I asked. I gotta say, never seen one around these parts before, but then again I was never looking for one. I doubt you need it, but keep that as a reminder for what this beast is capable of. I put my phone back in my pocket, sighing and letting my chin drop into my hands. In any other situation I'd be shocked to find out such a creature was real, but not now. This is all great, Mr. Barnett, Martin said with quivering uncertainty, but it doesn't help us. What are we gonna do? What can we do? I don't know. Well, I have a stupid idea, but it's just grappin' at straws. Anything over sitting here and waiting to die, Martin breathed, staring off into space, anything. Grandpa looked up toward the basement window, the only source of natural light in the room, what little of it remained. Well, I was checking my traps out east from here, about 700 yards into the woods. Only, when I got there, there was this smudge. I don't know what to call it, but that's the best I can describe what it looked like. It was like, looking into it, I couldn't register what I was looking at. Hurt my eyes after a while. Never seen nothing like it. Was after that I started seeing the scorestender, so. He trailed off, like he was struggling to find the words to say. So, what? I pressed, leaning forward in anticipation. Again, this is guesswork, but I think that's where it came out from. I threw a rock into it when I was there, but ain't hear it hit the ground. Like it went someplace else. If we can just lead it back there, just get it to go back in dash. Wait, hold on, I interrupted, shouldn't we call someone? Police? The damn army? What d'you think'll happen to the cops when they come out here, huh? What's a chief and a rookie in one police car gonna be able to put up against it? And good luck convincing US military to send out Marines. You'd be lucky if they thought it was a joke. I shut my mouth, swallowing my next words, allowing Grandpa to continue with his proposition. Either the beast leaves, or we die. I'm not even gonna talk about trying to drive away, you seen what it does to the trees. Stealth might work, but it's better at that than we are, big as it is, and I don't want to risk either of yous losing your lives. His last remark sent a chill down my spine. He'd said nothing explicitly, but I already began to understand what he meant. Granddad, you. Don't worry about me, champ. I got something, but you gotta listen closely. Both of you. Martin and I set our full attention on him. I wanted to hear his plan, but I really hoped it was going to go a different way from what I was thinking. Now, I want to make this clear before anything else. I'm going alone, and you boys need to sit tight and do as I say. My heart dropped, plunging into the stone-cold sea of despair. Are you crazy? No, I have to go with you, I dash. Grandpa cut me off, shushing me. As I say, he commanded. I knew he was right, but in the face of loss my thoughts wrestled against the idea. Okay. Now I'm gonna call you when I'm a ways off, alright? You have to pick up, and stay on the call with me. It's vital you keep your attention on my voice. I need both of you to be brave for the next part. I need you to make as much noise as you can. Martin's eyes bulged in fear. Won't that just get us killed? I haven't finished. That's only up until I call you. When I do, you shut up, and you hide in the darkest corner of this cellar, okay? I was heaving for breath now, cold beads of sweat budding on my forehead, but I closed my eyes and stilled myself. Why yeah, okay. Good. Once we're connected, I'll start dash. We were silenced by a single muffled thump from overhead, so forceful that the ceiling spewed cement dust down on us. Then another thump. And another. And another. I fell off my perch in shock when a booming crash sounded from above, chased by the clattering of rubble. The steady thuds drew nearer, louder, until the only sound was that of the floorboards, groaning under immense weight. I looked over to Grandpa, who looked over to me and whipped a finger to his lips. I nodded, then slowly turned toward the basement hatch. The beast was trying its best to move silently. A stifled whimper escaped my lungs as I saw the hatch buckle. A loud bang shook the house's foundations, then nothing. In the silence, I could make out the beast's ticking growl. It was toying with us. Trying to catch us out, make us think we'd been foiled so we'd burst out in a panic and try to flee. Its intelligence terrified me so much more than its grotesque appearance. It tried this bait a few more times, before huffing angrily. The heavy creaks grew distant until we could no longer hear it, aside from the single crash of a fallen tree somewhere outside. I stood up, eager to set this plan into motion, only to be dragged back down by a firm grip on my arms. My eyes fell to meet my grandpa's, looking at me with a wide-eyed scowl. "Sit down," he hissed. "Not yet. Bastard's clever. It's probably waiting at the tree lean, watching for us to come out." The three of us sat in silence, ears attuned for even the slightest noise to indicate its presence. After an excruciating wait, Grandpa rose to his feet and crept over to the ladder. He scaled it, wincing at the creak of a rung, then pushed open the hatch ever so slowly. The rug that had been above was tattered, torn fragments slipping down into the now open space. He peeked out from side to side, checking rigorously that we were safe. As he pressed his hand upward, what sounded like a broken tile was disturbed, clattering to the floor above us. Grandpa froze in place, visibly tensing. Kriawalk. The heavy step, followed by the guttural rattle. I prayed to God I wouldn't hear, forced Grandpa into action. He pushed himself off of the ladder, tucking and rolling to the floor, right before the hatch was slammed by immense force, cracking it and warping the hinges. Grandpa shot to his feet, adrenaline far outpacing his old age. He glanced around wildly at the floor, before looking up at us with newfound determination. "Ah, shit, damn it. Change of plans. Martin, distracted. Make some noise. Kel, give me a leg up to the window." Martin's jaw fell open, and his breathing quickened. "Fuck," he yelped, pressing fingers into his temples, but to his credit he turned toward the hatch and started up a racket straight after. "Come get it, you fucker. You ugly sack of shit." While Martin was busy cussing out the chimney beast, Grandpa and I hurried over to the window and braced myself in a kneel, fingers locked together forming a foothold, where he planted a foot. 1, 2, 3 dash. I heaved him up, holding my posture while he unlatched and swung the window open. My body was already tired from running away, and Grandpa was heavier than he looked. Still, I hauled him up further until he was out past the waist, and he pulled himself out into the hazy night. I kept my focus on him as he turned around, refusing the urge to look as I heard claws cleaving away ravenously. "All right, I'll be calling in a minute," he panted. "When I do, tell Martin to zip. I love you, bud. You too, Granddad." My words latched onto him, fueling a forgotten instinct that slammed his heels into the forest floor and sent him sprinting into the trees, fading until he was merged with the dark itself. I was grounded again when Martin let out a shriek, and I turned to see him backpedaling from those spindly claws extending through the jagged hole that once was the hatch. A thick trail of blood smeared from him as he shuffled back, the same crimson that slicked one of the titanic claws. "It got me, God it hurts," he cried, flipping over and resorting to a belly crawl towards me. I rushed over and dragged him as far away as I could, but he flopped to the floor in shock when I released my grip. His calf was a mess of exposed, glistening flesh and bone, sliced through like warm butter. His mouth hung half open, but without a sound, so I rushed to build a cacophony in his place. As booming as I tried to make myself sound, I devolved into whimpering shouts. The beast's arm had reached almost halfway across the room, yet still it slithered further and further through the broken hatch, claws tick-tick-ticking around in search of our flesh. Backed up into the furthest corner alongside Martin, the monstrous hand grew closer. Slowly, agonizingly so. I only became aware of the incoming call from the vibration in my jacket pocket. It felt as if, somehow, safety lay in the act of answering my grandpa's call. My hand shot into my pocket and yanked the phone out, fumbling with the touchscreen and picking up. "Granddad?" It's so close, it's about to get us, do something, please," I wailed into my phone. Instead of a reply, a loud crack rang through the night, and then the phone. The beast's arm lurched backwards, freezing for a moment, before it tore out from the basement, peppering the floor with wood fragments. As simple a sound it was, I recognized it. His Black Hawk. He'd taken it with him. I don't know when he picked it up, he may have had it on him the entire time. Out the window, I saw the hulking silhouette barrel into the trees at speeds rivaling my Jeep in fifth. I jumped when I heard Grandpa abruptly begin shouting over the call. The words were indiscernible, blending in with the scuffled sounds of movement. I took the moment to take off my jacket, then my t-shirt, which I pulled tightly around Martin's upper calf as a tourniquet. "Hey, Kel," Grandpa said over the phone, sounding hollow and tinny, "make sure you keep up your aerobics. Gah, it sure as shit don't get easier with the years." I let out a half-hearted chuckle. "I will. I want to go hiking through these woods with you, camping, surviving off of the hunt." "I know you do." God, I do too," he said, stifling a sob. "You're gonna have to stay strong for your ma, okay? There ain't no chance I'm getting out this time. But you too are." I broke down then, thick watery streams lining my cheeks. "I'm going to miss you. So much, Granddad." But we had some good times." "Amazing times, no. I sure as hell did. And, well, this is a pretty badass way to go out, right?" An unfamiliar comfort swelled up inside me, almost breaking through the tears. "Yeah. All right, I'm here. The smudge. No idea what I'll find through there." I could hear the thundering beast across the call as it gained on him, its clicks and rattles too. "I'm going in. Promise me one thing, though." "Anything, Granddad." "Heh. You be good, kid, and make my daughter proud. That's all." A bizarre noise came from the phone speaker, something akin to the sound of a stone sliding across a frozen lake, followed by a splash that seemed to kill all noise. That dead silence was broken when a shuddering voice spoke again through the phone. "What the? Where are you?" I yelled, pleading for any small morsel of information he could provide. "I don't know, I'm in a pipe, I think. Some kind of glass tube. I can see everything outside. It's all there, all at once, there's more of these tubes, so many more, they're branching and splitting but." The connection got progressively weaker as he talked, jittering and buzzing in my ears. "I'm heading down this tube now, and there, central one, but it's huge. Enormous, holy shit. No, I don't think it's the central, in the distance, so many, the hell is this place?" My exhausted brain couldn't fathom a single thing to say. I just listened, almost as confused as he was. Streams of, through some of them, and the dash. He was cut off by a tremendous splash, but the sound quality at this point made it sound more like a roar. I could only hear his whimpers, until that hissing trill crawled its way under my skin once more. It melded with the audio glitches. But then, I heard something I never could have expected, even after seeing what I'd seen. CKCKCKKRRR. SSSSS. S. Ra CKCK. It sounded as if the creature was stuttering, clearing its throat, before. Xxalti BRRR. Ariadith. It TTS flow shows us, CKCKCK, the path. It spoke. The unearthly, nightmare beast had spoken. Its words were jarring, like it was repeating after someone teaching it how to talk, broken by animalistic clicks and hisses. Grandpa screamed, but the call lost connection completely and drew it out as a high, sine wave tone. My hand acted off its own accord and loosened its grip, sending the phone clattering to the floor. By the time I had crouched down to grab it, only my home screen greeted me as I pressed the home button. Call failed. I looked down to Martin. He was out cold, but breathing. The bleeding had died down, but he needed urgent treatment. Even so, I fell to the floor, back slouched up against the cold concrete wall, and decided to wait it out until sunrise. I was certain Grandpa's plan worked, but just the slightest uncertainty held me in place. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off. My limbs ached, head thumping. I fought against my eyelids, but they felt as if dragged down by anchors. All light vanished, and I faded into sleep. I woke to heat on my face, and a red-orange blur. I opened my eyes, grimacing at the rays of sunlight that poured through the destroyed basement hatch directly onto my face. Any notions of a simple nightmare were shattered. Martin. I rolled over on my side, seeing him laying a few feet away. Thank God, he was still breathing. The blood coating the skin of his left leg was dry and crusted, but a small amount of it still seeped from his mangled limb. I chose to let him rest while I turned to the broken ladder, hauling myself up what remained of its rungs, and out into the house, what remained of it, at least. Utter devastation. I do not exaggerate when I say almost the entire front portion of the house was gone. Wooden beams jutted out from piles of rubble and dust, but all was still. Unlike the day prior, birdsong weaved throughout the woods and into the ruins. I recall learning about how forest animals would go quiet when a predator is nearby, but I'd been too on edge to notice until their sounds had returned. Still, subtle chills wormed their way up my spine. I felt safe, but I'd also felt safe with Grandpa in the basement, until the attack. No smoke plumed from anywhere across the tree line, and no stench defiled my nose, but I couldn't shake it. I spent some time scrabbling around in the back half of the house that still stood. Quicker than expected, I found the keys to Grandpa's truck, in the corner of the kitchen counter. I practically leaped down into the old wine cellar, then slowed my pace, gently shaking Martin, until he stirred. He was groggy and confused. "Don't worry, man. I'm gonna get you home." I wrapped his left arm over my shoulder, supporting him to the ladder. It was tough getting him out, but I did, and we hobbled through the ruins to the truck. Driving faster than truly necessary, I swerved, slamming on the brakes when the fallen tree trunks came into view almost out of nowhere. The jolt shook Martin, and he came to attention from the pain in his leg. I apologized for it, but wasted no more time in getting out and helping Martin down from his seat. The stench of death was stronger in the air, the Wendigo corpse festering nearby. It brought me back to the night before, the raw terror, spawning paranoia within me that grew intense over the short walk between the truck and my Jeep. I felt exposed, naked. We made it across the trees and into my Jeep quickly, even with Martin's injury. Still, without any warning signs of the beast, my heart was drumming so hard I could see my chest pulse. After a messy three-point turn, the wheels slipped, kicking up dust before we shot away down the track. We drove until reaching the small police station, where I flew out of the Jeep and burst through its double doors. Perhaps a rash action in retrospect, but my mind was elsewhere. Before anything else, I had them call an ambulance for my friend, following by reporting a severe animal attack. When I was asked what attacked us, I spat out, "Cougar." The officer grunted, and I laid out the facts. Grandpa was gone, dragged away by our assailant. An ambulance arrived soon thereafter to pick up Martin. The EMTs were visibly surprised by the laceration, but attended to him nonetheless. He'd lost a fair bit of blood, but they quickly got him in stable condition at the nearest hospital, where he stayed for the next week. A search party banded together to look for Grandpa, but they found nothing, of course. I was questioned about the state of his house, but I think the trauma welling up in my eyes was the best defense I could have had. No scorch marks on the rubble to indicate explosives, nothing. It's been a few years since this all happened, and I've made it through the stages of grief in one piece. I'd like to say Grandpa lives on in my memory, but that wouldn't be entirely accurate to say. I can still remember him, our conversations, days out, the smell of his fireplace, all that. But no matter how hard I try, I can't remember what he looked like. That's to say, there's only an imperceptible smudge where he once was in any pictures I still have. I don't know where he ended up, some massive network of tubes, but I get the distinct impression that his grave lies elsewhere, in another place separate from this world. I'm eternally grateful for his sacrifice, yeah, but I can't help but think that it was only our lives that were saved from the scorestender. Are there more of them, or is it somehow able to relocate itself? Only my grandpa would have answers, but, yeah. Just in case, if you find yourself out in the wilderness and you see a steady plume of smoke rising from the trees, perhaps even smell the organic stench of digestion, it'd be best to call off the occasion entirely. Once it's on to you, well, I only hope you're as lucky as we were on the day my grandpa died. Ninth story. There is something in the Mississippi River. This story took place in 2013. It was the beginning of summer and me and my brother Wes had just gotten to my Uncle Matt's house in Mayersville, which is a couple of miles from the nearby Mississippi River. Uncle Matt gave us both his famous Matt hugs as we entered. After we unpacked, we had a few drinks since Wes finally turned 21 last month, since I'm only a year older, but he has drunk before on several occasions. We just chatted about nonsensical stuff, played pool, all the fun stuff. The next day we left to go camping since our Aunt Melissa was away on a business trip. As we were driving, my uncle told us there may be gators and bull sharks at the Mississippi River. But then he told us he had seen something much worse down there when he was our age. He spoke of a 7 or 8 feet tall lake monster that resembled a more monstrous version of the creature from the Black Lagoon. "You got to be pulling our chain," Wes said. "No, my boy, it's all true. I saw him when I was fishing for a walleye. When I was reeling in my catch, it actually had the balls to try and take my fish. I thought it was a bull shark at first until I reeled in the head of the walleye and saw them glowing eyes under the water. I almost shit myself when I got a better look at it." My brother still didn't really believe it, but he gave Uncle Matt the benefit of the doubt, but I was quite intrigued. My uncle was 6 feet 4 inches and lifted weights every day. The guy is practically built like Vin Diesel. He is usually never scared of anything, so if this thing managed to do it, it must have been a big deal. When we parked at the camping spot, we walked the trail down to the small beach connected to the river. We unpacked our camping gear, fishing gear, and Uncle Matt's M14 rifle, which he kept in a special case. After setting up our tents, me and Wes went into the woods to get firewood. When dusk set in, we were cooking the 2 walleyes that we caught. When Wes was cooking the potatoes, I heard the water splash near the shallow part of the beach. "The hell was that?" I said. "Probably a catfish," Wes told me. The splashing then happened again before it stopped once more. "Hope that ain't a gator," Uncle Matt said. "No way, not out here," Wes said. We were then listening to the song, "Asylum," by Disturbed while we were eating. When we finished, I shot my girlfriend some pictures of the walleyes we caught before stuffing the phone in my pocket. Wes went to take a piss out in the bushes while the rest of us ate. "Hope there ain't no snake in them bushes," Uncle Matt said, sipping a beer. "Funny," Wes called out. I then decided to take a dip in the river since it was hot as hell that day. After taking off my white tank top, I changed into my bathing suit before jumping in. My Uncle Matt was reading a hardcover copy of the book IT while Wes was playing a game on his phone. When I went underwater for the second time, I felt something like a hand tightly grab at my left calf. I opened my eyes in the blurry water to barely make out some sort of humanoid fish thing with sharp spikes on its back. I kicked it as hard as I could several times until it finally relented when I gave it a good kick to what I assumed was its face. I darted out of the water, screaming like a banshee towards Uncle Matt and Wes. I noticed 3 big, but not severe or fatal cuts on my calf. "What the hell happened?" Uncle Matt asked. "There's something in the water," I said as he grabbed the first aid kit out of his tent. "What are you talking about?" Wes said. "I saw it. It wasn't a bull shark, it was something else, some kind of fish with arms," I said. Uncle Matt comes out with the gauze and antiseptic. He cleaned and dressed my wound before wrapping my calf in gauze. "Did you get a look at it?" Uncle Matt said. "Sort of. It was the size of a man, probably bigger. And it had these spikes on its back," I said. "Shit, it has to be the monster from the story," Wes stated. "Oh, now you believe it?" I snarked. "Well, what the hell kind of fish leaves a precise scratch like that?" Wes replied. My uncle then stands frozen, looking at the river. I and Wes go to see what's wrong. Then we both freeze in fear as well when we see 2 glowing eyes of a yellowish-green color from underwater. They were completely devoid of any irises or pupils, just practically COD zombie-style eyes. What the fuck is that? Wes asked, now sweating. Uncle Matt runs to retrieve his rifle. He fires 4 rounds in the water to scare it off. When the waves in the water from the bullets settle, the eyes were gone. Looks like it left, for now. Uncle Matt said. What if it comes back? I asked. We got weapons, so if it comes back we can hopefully just light it up. Uncle Matt answered. If it can't go on land I guess we'll be good. Wes said. When we clocked out for the night I kept watch for the monster with the AR-15 since it was the only gun we had on us besides the .357. In hindsight, I have no idea why we didn't leave right then and there. I guess we just wanted to prove we were the 3 badasses who weren't afraid of shit. After 20 minutes pass I got bored and decided to pass the time by playing Angry Birds. When I went to wake Uncle Matt for his watch shift, I heard a loud, alligator-like hissing noise coming from the bushes where Wes pissed. However, the small growl that followed the hissing was nothing that an alligator would sound off. I slowly and cautiously walked up to the bush, gun tightly grasped in my hand. I turned on its underbarrel flashlight and I used the night vision scope that was attached to see what was in there. I aimed the flashlight at the bush and what I saw would make even the toughest folk shit themselves. It was a large grayish humanoid creature with fin-like webs on its forearms. It also had webbing on its 3-toed feet. It had a tail resembling that of a catfish, black spikes on its back, 3-fingered hands with sharp claws, and a maw filled with pointed teeth, as well as yellow eyes with black slanted pupils like that of a snake. Its left eye looked blinded with what looked like a scar from a blade underneath. It hissed at me as it opened its mouth, clearly feeling threatened. Holy fuck! I yelled as I fired nearly the entire magazine at it while screaming my lungs out from fear. I must have hit it, because it shrieked in pain as it darted past me on all 4s and back into the water. I ran back to the tents to see Wes and Uncle Matt up with machetes in hand, lowering them with relief when they saw me. Are you okay, Roger? Uncle Matt asked, concerned. Yeah, I managed to get a good shot at it and it ran off into the water. Let's just get our asses back to the house before the SOB comes back. Wes said as we ran to the car with nothing but our weapons, leaving all the other shit behind. We sped the hell out of there as soon as we got in the car. Uncle Matt called the police about what happened while me and Wes had a couple more beers to process what happened. The next morning we went to retrieve our stuff. Several police cruisers were already there. Our tents and everything else were mostly untouched, but all our food was predictably gone, and our coolers were completely trashed with huge claw marks unlike any I've ever seen. Better that being eaten than us. Wes said. Yeah, no shit, I said. We talked to the sheriff for a little bit about what we saw. He said he wouldn't have believed us if not for the blue-colored blood they recovered. Blood? Uncle Matt asked. Yup, whatever you shot definitely wasn't no gator or anything around here. In my 38 years in the force I've never done a case like this. If you guys promise to keep quiet about this I got some cash waiting. Said the sheriff as we got our tents and fishing gear. They seize our destroyed coolers for evidence, which we obviously didn't mind as the sheriff wrote us the massive check. The number I won't disclose. After the incident, we haven't talked about the river creature, as my uncle called it since. Present day and we still haven't seen or heard of it to this day. Now I'm 28 and married to my beautiful wife of 5 years. I only fear one thing, what if there are a whole species of those things lurking in the river somewhere, waiting for their next unsuspecting meal? I don't know what the hell that town is hiding, but I preferably don't want nothing to do with any of it ever again. My advice, if you're camping by the Mississippi River, please have some protection. Anything. I'll update you guys if anything else happens. 10th story. This story was shared HLLBLZR 310. The creature on New Year's Eve. So, I had a very strange thing occur late in the evening, or early in the morning if you prefer, on New Year's Eve. I had been out at a party drinking and smoking a bit, as is customary. At around 2:30 a.m. few friends, I'll use nicknames for them, Mads and Max, and I left the party we were at and headed back to our town. We had kept the roach of a blunt from the party and we decided to pull into the resident parking lot outside the condo complex I live in to finish it off. Not 2 minutes after we spark it, a man comes stumbling up the road that runs through the parking area. This road, for reference's sake, runs through the parking area and down a hill to a few houses. I know pretty much all the people who live down that small hill. The man didn't really perturb me or my friends, so we kept smoking. Then a minute later a high school girl wearing no shoes or socks and just a short, skimpy dress comes walking up the hill. At this point I was starting to wonder what kind of weird party was going on at one of my neighbors' houses. The girl walked through the parking area without a word and then turned onto the main street and headed up it. At first we assumed we wouldn't bother worrying because, despite her lack of shoes, she was walking straight and seemed to be keeping to herself. That's when things got strange. After she had disappeared from sight up the street she came bolting back down as fast as she could given her shoeless situation. When she reached my friends and I she slowed down, but looked very spooked. Mads asked her what had happened and she stepped away from her at first. Then, with horror-stricken eyes, she pointed up to the main street. We all turned and looked, but there was nothing in our direct line of sight. Max and I decided we'd go up the street to investigate what was scaring this girl so much. We made sure that Mads and the girl got in his car, as she was the designated driver of the evening, and lock it. Max and I went up the main street and for 5 minutes we saw nothing. Then we passed under the one streetlight on the upper portion of the street. This streetlight has a stubborn and nerve-wracking tendency to turn off at night once you pass under it. To my dismay, it turned off leaving us in total darkness save for the faint glow of a light at the end of someone's driveway. This light was very low to the ground. That's when we saw it. Something that looked like a naked person but wasn't quite human waddled down the street toward us. It moved as though it were half squatting and because of this, its hands dragged along the ground as they hung limp at its sides. I couldn't make out its face, and Max told me later that he couldn't either. It was also making a throaty gurgling noise, as if it was almost choking on something. All we could do in the moment was turn and run as fast as we could back down the street. I ran right into my house and Max ran to this car. I could hear the car screeching out of the parking area. I locked the door and didn't even bother to look outside to see if the thing was still coming down the street. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.